universe in its infinite complexity operates according to laws, not the laws of men or civilizations. Those shift and crumble across centuries like sand dunes in a stellar wind, but the immutable laws of physics, of cause and effect, of matter and energy moving through the cold mathematics of spacetime. Starfleet had built an entire civilization on the understanding of those laws. The warp drive, the transporter, the deflector dish humming at the bow of the USS Enterprise, all of it was humanity's declaration that the universe could be known, mapped, and ultimately respected. But the universe, it turns out, has a sense of humor. Captain's log, stardate 3847.2. The Enterprise has completed its survey of the anomaly system and is proceeding on course to Starbase 12 for scheduled crew rotation and resupply. Its sensors have been registering intermittent gravitational variance along our current heading. Nothing Lieutenant Spock hasn't attributed to residual quantum instability from the system's binary star configuration. It is, by all accounts, a routine transit. In my experience, those are the ones to watch. James T. Kirk leaned back in the command chair with the practiced ease of a man who had sat in it through Klingon incursions, temporal paradoxes, and at least 3 separate incidents involving beings of near-omnipotent power. The bridge of the Enterprise hummed around him, the soft chirp of console alerts, the steady pulse of the view screen showing nothing more dramatic than a field of unremarkable stars. Uhura's quiet murmuring as she monitored subspace frequencies. Spock. Kirk didn't look up from the armrest display. Oh, that gravitational variance. Still attributing it to the binary configuration? Spock straightened from his science station with the unhurried precision that always made Kirk feel just slightly like he was being tolerated. The binary star hypothesis was always provisional, Captain. The variance has increased by a factor of 12 in the past 6 minutes. I am now revising my assessment. To what? Unknown. Spock said it the way other men might say obviously or fascinating, with complete equanimity. The energy signature does not correspond to any phenomenon in the Starfleet database. It has the characteristics of a quantum tunneling event, but on a scale approximately 400 times larger than theoretically possible. Kirk was already on his feet. Theoretically. Theories exist to be revised. Darn Captain. Chekhov's console erupted in a cascade of alerts before Kirk could respond. The young navigator spun in his chair, eyes wide with the specific excitement of a man who has just seen something his instruments are wholly unprepared to describe. Captain, something is emerging from the anomaly. Something very large. The view screen shifted automatically, sensors struggling to resolve the shape pushing through a collapsing fold of distorted space. What emerged was not a Klingon warship. It was not a Romulan vessel uncloaking with its characteristic shimmer of displaced light. It was not anything in the taxonomy of known spacefaring civilizations. It was, as best the Enterprise's sensors could determine, a city. A city the color of rust and regret, stretching across the view screen in a vast, to ungainly sprawl of industrial infrastructure. Cooling towers, antennae arrays, mining equipment welded onto more mining equipment, like the universe's largest act of improvised engineering. The vessel, if vessel it was, bore the quiet dignity of something that had been falling apart for a very long time and had simply decided this was now its permanent aesthetic. Running lights blinked erratically along its hull. A name was stenciled across its forward section in lettering that had seen better geological epochs. Red Dwarf. Mr. Spock, Kirk said very carefully. I am scanning, Captain. A pause. The vessel is approximately 6 kilometers in length. Its propulsion system appears to be a hydrogen ram scoop drive of a design I have never encountered. Combined with what appears to be a conventional chemical booster array that has not been active in... Another pause, longer this time. The pause of a Vulcan recalibrating his instruments because the instruments have clearly malfunctioned. 3,127 years. The bridge went quiet. Say that again, Bones said from behind Kirk, where he'd appeared in the doorway, with the unerring instinct of a man drawn to disaster. The vessel's hull dating is consistent with an origin point approximately 3 million years in our past, Spock repeated, with the tone of someone who found the facts perfectly adequate and other people's disbelief frankly inefficient. However, its design is consistent with early 23rd century Earth engineering, specifically, mining and ore processing vessels registered to the Jupiter Mining Corporation. Jupiter Mining Corporation, Kirk repeated. A commercial enterprise, Earth-based. Their operational records would be 3 million years old, Bones finished. Jim, are we looking at a ghost ship? Kirk studied the screen. Red Dwarf sat in space with the immovable patience of something that had seen entire civilizations rise and fall and had simply not gotten around to caring. Uhura, open a channel. Aye, sir. A beat. Channel open, Captain. Hailing on all standard frequencies. Kirk straightened. This is Captain James T. Kirk of the USS Enterprise, representing the United Federation of Planets. We are responding to your emergence from a quantum anomaly. Please identify yourself and state the nature of your situation. Silence. Then, from the speakers, a voice. Unhurried. Faintly nasal. The voice of someone who had received a great many surprising pieces of news over the years and had long since run out of the energy to be properly shocked by them. Hello? Is anyone there? This is the mining vessel Red Dwarf out of Earth originally, though that's a bit complicated. We seem to have gone a bit off course. Again, are you the television? Holly said we might pick up a signal. Kirk and Spock looked at each other. Not television, Kirk said into the channel. This is a Federation starship. To whom am I speaking? A longer pause. Then in the background, a second voice. Thin, reedy, and vibrating with the particular energy of a man who has spotted an opportunity to feel important. I'll handle this. Stand aside, Lister. I outrank you. You're a hologram, Rimmer. You can't. The rank is still valid. A third voice, smooth and aggrieved and magnificent. Would both of you please? I am trying to groom. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. Kirk pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. Behind him, he heard Bones make the quiet sound of a man updating his definition of strange. Mr. Spock, Kirk said. Life signs? Fascinating, Spock said, which in context felt less like a reassurance and more like a warning. I am reading 4 distinct biosignatures aboard the vessel. 1 human male, 1 humanoid of feline evolutionary descent, 1 mechanoid of artificial construction, considerably more sophisticated than any android in the Federation database, and 1, he paused again, light B projection, a hologram, Captain, a self-sustaining, mobile, hard light holographic projection. A hologram, Kirk said, apparently concerned with his rank. Kirk looked at the view screen. Red Dwarf stared back at him, immense, ancient, utterly indifferent to the disruption it had caused by existing. 3 million years old, a crew of 4, a ship that had no business being in this century, in this quadrant, in this universe. He sat back down in the command chair. Uhura, he said, tell them we're sending a shuttle. The shuttlecraft Galileo cut through the void between the 2 vessels with the quiet efficiency of Federation engineering. A small, sort of purposeful dart of light moving towards something that looked, on the shuttle's forward viewport, less like a spaceship and more like an industrial accident that had achieved sentience and decided to keep moving. Kirk sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching Red Dwarf grow larger with each passing second, and found himself doing something he rarely did on approach to an unknown vessel. He found himself trying to decide where, exactly, one was supposed to dock with a thing like this. There, Spock said from behind him, with the calm certainty of a man whose instruments had located a docking port the way other men might locate a restaurant. Port side, section 47. There is an operational airlock, though its magnetic seal reads as approximately 63% nominal efficiency. 63%, Kirk repeated. It will hold. Probably. High praise from you, Spock. I find that unwarranted optimism serves no practical function, Captain. Bones wedged into the seat behind Kirk with the expression of a man who has made his objections known and been overruled and is now simply cataloging future grievances. Leaned forward against his restraints. I want it on the record that sending 3 senior officers onto a 3-million-year-old mining ship crewed by people who thought we were a television signal was not my recommendation. Noted, Bones. I'm a doctor, Jim, not an archaeologist, not a first contact specialist, and yet here you are. Here I am, Bones agreed, with the defeated dignity of a man who has had this conversation many times before and always ends up in the shuttlecraft anyway. The Galileo found the airlock with Spock's characteristic precision, and the docking clamps engaged with a resonant clunk that traveled through the shuttle's hull and up through the soles of Kirk's boots. Not the clean magnetic snap of Federation technology, but something older, heavier, the sound of metal that had been doing this job for so long, it had opinions about it. The seal held. 63% apparently was enough. Kirk checked his phaser, not because he expected to need it, but because 3 million years was a long time for anything to go wrong with a ship's internal systems, and he was a man who had survived middle age precisely by checking his phaser. He nodded to Spock. Spock pressed the airlock release. The door opened. The smell hit first. It was not a dangerous smell. It was not the acrid bite of plasma fire or the sterile chill of a decompressed compartment. It was something far more existentially complex. The deep, settled, utterly committed aroma of a place that had been lived in continuously for a very long time by people who had varying relationships with the concept of tidying up. There was curry in it, definitely curry, and engine oil, and something that might have been unwashed laundry compressed by geological time into a kind of olfactory sediment layer. And beneath all of it, very faintly, the ghost of a pine air freshener that had been trying its best for approximately 2.5 million years and had not quite succeeded. Bones physically recoiled. Good God! Fascinating, Spock said, and produced his tricorder with the focused enthusiasm of a man who has just been handed a research opportunity. Kirk stepped through into the corridor beyond. It was wide, built for industrial traffic, for cargo loaders and maintenance teams moving equipment between the ship's vast internal spaces. And it was lit in the amber-orange glow of lighting panels that had been doing their job for so long they had developed a kind of philosophical resignation about it. The walls were metal, utilitarian, covered in the layered archaeology of 3 million years of notices, graffiti, maintenance logs, and at one point someone had painted a fairly accomplished mural of a sunset that had subsequently been partially obscured by a repair panel and then partially restored by someone else who had clearly been working from memory. The corridor stretched in both directions, disappearing into the middle distance with the casual confidence of something that had plenty more corridor where that came from. Standing in it, waiting for them, was the most extraordinary reception committee Kirk had ever encountered in a career that included first contact with silicon-based life forms, sentient gas clouds, and at least one god who turned out to be having a bad day. The human was first. He stood with the comfortable slouch of someone who had long ago made his peace with the universe's indifference and had decided the correct response was a bacon sandwich and a can of lager. He was young, mid-20s perhaps, with the kind of face that suggested he'd been handsome before the universe had spent several years using him as a stress toy. He wore a rumpled uniform in the red and gray of what Spock's tricorder was quietly identifying as Jupiter Mining Corporation standard crew issue, and he was holding with absolute unself-conscious ease a can of something that the tricorder registered as containing enough alcohol to qualify as a cleaning solvent. "Hiya," said Dave Lister. "You're really not the telly then." "Really not?" Kirk confirmed. "Right, yeah. Holly said it was probably a ship, but Rimmer said it was definitely the telly." He considered this. "Rimmer's wrong about most things, to be fair. I'm Lister. Dave Lister. Third technician." He paused. "Well, third technician and also the last human being alive, technically, depending on how you count it, which is that's a long conversation. Do you want a beer?" Kirk blinked. In 17 years of Starfleet service, across hundreds of first contact situations, ranging from the deeply formal to the genuinely terrifying, nobody had ever opened with an offer of beer. He found himself unexpectedly rather liking Dave Lister. "Maybe later," he said. "I'm Captain James Kirk, USS Enterprise. This is Commander Spock, my first officer, and Dr. Leonard McCoy, Chief Medical Officer." Lister looked at them with the careful attention of someone doing a rapid assessment. His eyes lingered on Spock's ears with the particular expression of a man who had encountered enough strange things that pointed ears barely registered as remarkable, but who was still making a note of it. "You're a Vulcan," Lister said to Spock. "Correct," Spock said. "We had a book about Vulcans in the ship's library. Holly mentioned you lot a few times when we were trying to figure out where we'd ended up." He scratched the back of his neck. "So we're really in, the future? Proper future? Starships and federations and all that?" "You are in the 23rd century, yes," Spock said. "Approximately 3 million, 100,000 years after your vessel's point of origin, based on hull dating and the degradation patterns of your ship's isotopic markers. Lister absorbed this with the quiet equanimity of someone who had already processed the 3 million years from home thing some considerable time ago and had since developed a fairly robust coping mechanism involving the aforementioned logger. Yeah, he said. Thought it was something like that. A beat. Smeggin' hell. Indeed, said Spock, which was as close as he came to commiseration. The second figure stepped forward, and Kirk's attention shifted to something that his eyes were processing correctly, but that his brain kept gently suggesting might be a mistake worth double-checking. The man, if man was the right word, and Kirk's instinct said the question was worth holding on to for later examination, was tall, slim, dressed in a uniform of the same JMC issue as Lister's, but worn with the aggressive precision of someone who believed that if he pressed his uniform correctly enough, the universe would eventually recognize his authority. He had a capital H on his forehead, rendered in what appeared to be light rather than pigment. He stood with his chin slightly elevated and his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that was clearly meant to convey command authority and was instead conveying something closer to a man trying very hard not to look like he was trying very hard. This, every sensor on Spock's tricorder agreed, was a hard light hologram. Arnold Judas Rimmer, the hologram announced in the tone of a man introducing himself to history. First officer of the Red Dwarf. He paused, apparently waiting for this to land with appropriate weight. Acting first officer. Another pause. In the absence of anyone else qualified. Bones leaned close to Kirk and said very quietly, "He's a hologram." "I'm aware, Bones." "A hologram who thinks he's a first officer." "Also aware." "Jim, I have a first officer on the Enterprise who has pointy ears and can calculate starship trajectories in his head. This man appears to have projected himself a middle parting. It is very precise," Kirk allowed. Rimmer, who had the finely calibrated sensitivity of a man who had spent his entire life suspecting people were talking about him and had generally been correct, drew himself up slightly. "I can hear you, you know. Hard light projection includes full auditory reception." He fixed Kirk with the look of a man who had decided to project confidence despite having absolutely no ammunition for it. "Captain Kirk, I've heard of you. Well, Holly mentioned you just now when you hailed us. The point is, I am fully briefed and prepared to conduct these negotiations on behalf of the Red Dwarf and her crew." "That's very," Kirk began. "I have prepared an agenda," Rimmer said, and produced from somewhere a PIAD that was clearly 3 million years old and was nevertheless displaying a bulleted list. Item 1. Formal recognition of Red Dwarf's status as a sovereign vessel under whatever treaty framework your Federation operates. Item 2. Resupply, specifically fuel, food, and if at all possible, something other than reconstituted chicken soup, because we have been eating reconstituted chicken soup for... "Rimmer," Lister said. "Item 3. Rimmer, I'm conducting a..." "He doesn't care about your agenda, man." The third and fourth members of the crew materialized from further down the corridor. Or rather, one materialized and one arrived at a pace that suggested he had been here the whole time and simply hadn't bothered to acknowledge anyone yet because he was waiting to see if they were worth acknowledging. The cat moved the way the universe's most confident creature moves, which is to say with the unhurried grace of someone who has decided that physics is a suggestion and style is a law. He was wearing a suit of deep crimson with silver trim that had absolutely no business existing on a mining ship, and his hair was perfect in the way that suggested it had simply never considered the possibility of being anything else. He looked at Kirk, at Spock, at McCoy, conducted a rapid and comprehensive assessment, and arrived at a conclusion. "Okay," said the cat. "I'm the best-looking one here. Just establishing that. Now carry on." Spock looked at his tricorder. "Felis sapiens," he said, with the tone of a scientist who has just confirmed a hypothesis he found genuinely remarkable. A humanoid species evolved from the domestic cat, Felis catus, over approximately 3 million years of isolated development. He looked up. "The evolutionary pathway is extraordinary. The cognitive and physiological development achieved in this time frame without external intervention represents..." "Are you talking about me?" the cat said. "I am discussing your species, yes." "Good," said the cat, adjusting his cuffs. "Keep doing that." Behind all of them, at a slight remove, and with the posture of someone who had spent considerable time perfecting the art of being unobtrusive, stood Crichton. He was, by any measure, much remarkable, a mechanoid of obviously sophisticated construction, his face a series of articulated plates arranged in an expression of permanent, earnest anxiety, his body encased in a dark uniform that he wore with the dedicated professionalism of someone who understood that presentation mattered. He held a small tray. On the tray were mugs. The mugs contained something hot. "I thought," said Crichton, in a voice that managed to be simultaneously apologetic and hopeful, "that perhaps our guest would like some tea. I've prepared a full selection. I also want to say, on behalf of the crew of Red Dwarf, that we are very, very sorry for whatever we've done to end up here. And I sincerely hope it hasn't caused any inconvenience. And if there's anything at all I can do to help resolve the situation, I will do it immediately and with a great deal of effort." He paused. "Also, the milk is reconstituted, I'm afraid. I apologize for that as well." Kirk looked at Lister. Lister shrugged in the way of a man who has long since stopped trying to explain Crichton and has decided that acceptance is more efficient. "Captain," Bones said softly, appearing at Kirk's shoulder with the expression he reserved for situations that were going to generate paperwork, "I want you to know that nothing about this is covered by any regulation I've ever read." "No," Kirk agreed. He looked along the corridor, at the ancient, lived-in, deeply improbable ship stretching away in both directions around these four extraordinary individuals. At Rimmer still holding his agenda, PADD, at the cat examining his own reflection in the polished surface of a bulkhead, at Crichton offering tea with the sincere desperation of someone for whom helpfulness was a survival mechanism, at Lister watching Kirk with the quiet, assessing patience of a man who had learned to read situations carefully because situations had rarely been kind to him. He took a mug of tea from Crichton's tray. "All right," said James T. Kirk. "Start from the beginning." The briefing room off Red Dwarf's sleeping quarters corridor was, by any objective measure, not a briefing room. It had been a briefing room once, in the distant geological past of the ship's operational history, in the sense that it had a table and chairs and a wall-mounted display screen that still technically functioned if you hit the upper left corner with the heel of your hand at a specific angle that Lister had discovered by accident during what he described as a particularly bad Tuesday. Over the subsequent 3 million years, it had accumulated the characteristics of somewhere that people came to eat, argue, avoid going to bed, watch television, have arguments they'd already had before, eat again, and occasionally, when the situation demanded it, discuss something important. The table was covered in the sedimentary evidence of this history. There were mugs. There was a plate with the structural memory of several past meals fossilized onto its surface. There was a dart in the wall that nobody had retrieved. There was, inexplicably, a sock. Crichton had made a heroic effort in the 20 minutes between the airlock and now, clearing the most egregious debris into a caddy he carried on his person for exactly these emergencies, and arranging the remaining mugs into something approaching a pattern. He had also produced a plate of biscuits from somewhere in his chassis, which he set in the center of the table with the careful pride of someone presenting a state dinner. Kirk sat at one end. Lister sat at the other with the easy informality of a man in his own home, which technically this was. Rimmer had positioned himself to Kirk's left with the agenda, PADD open, and a pen produced from somewhere, because Rimmer was the kind of man who believed that producing a pen communicated authority. Spock sat to Kirk's right, tricorder open, processing everything with the quiet industry of a computer that has been handed an interesting problem and intends to be thorough about it. Bones sat beside Spock, tea in hand, watching the room with the expression of a physician cataloging symptoms. The cat had declined a seat on the grounds that the chairs were not good enough for his trousers and was instead leaning against the wall in a posture that managed to look simultaneously casual and like the cover of a fashion periodical. Crichton stood near the door, technically not participating but radiating helpfulness like a small anxious son. On the wall screen, a face had appeared. Holly was the ship's computer, and Holly's face was the face of a middle-aged human of indeterminate gender and maximum patience, rendered in the soft monochrome glow of a display that had been running for 3 million years and had consequently developed a certain philosophical equanimity about most things. Holly watched the proceedings with the calm of an intelligence that had long ago calculated every probable outcome of every possible situation and had arrived at a state of being that was somewhere between wisdom and mild exasperation. "Holly," Lister said, by way of introduction. "Ship's computer. IQ of 6,000. "Nominally," Holly said. "What does that mean?" "It means that 6,000 is the number, and nominally is doing a lot of work in that sentence." Spock looked at the screen with the focused interest of a scientist who has just discovered a new specimen. "A holographic artificial intelligence of considerable processing capability," he said, a half to himself. "The architecture is unlike anything in the Federation database. The cognitive modeling approach appears to be unique," Holly said without particular vanity. "Yeah, I've had a look at your computer systems via the comlink you established when you docked. No offense, but yours is a bit basic." Spock raised an eyebrow. Kirk noted this because Spock raising an eyebrow was the Vulcan equivalent of another man dropping his tea. "The Enterprise computer," Spock said carefully, "represents the most advanced artificial intelligence architecture currently developed by the Federation's finest." "It doesn't have a face, though, does it?" Holly said. "A face is not a metric of computational." "I'm just saying, nah, bit impersonal." Holly looked at Kirk with the expression of someone who finds most situations mildly amusing and has given up pretending otherwise. "Your captain seems nice, though. I like his hair." Kirk touched his hair involuntarily. Bones made a sound that was definitely not a laugh. "Right," said Kirk, reasserting the threat of command with the practiced ease of a man who had conducted diplomatic negotiations with beings of literal godlike power and was not going to be derailed by a 3-million-year-old computer with opinions about personal grooming. "Let's talk about what happened. From the beginning, in as much detail as you can provide." Lister wrapped both hands around his mug and leaned forward with the serious expression of a man who had told this story before and had never quite gotten over it. It started about God, feels like forever ago now, but it was about, 6, 7 years back our time? I was a third technician on this ship, lowest rank you can have without technically being the mop. I had a cat." He paused. "I smuggled a cat aboard, against regulations. She was called Frankenstein. I refused to get rid of her, so Captain Hollister put me in stasis, suspended animation, until we got back to Earth. That was the plan." He picked up his mug, set it down again. "While I was in stasis, there was a radiation leak. Cadmium-2 killed the whole crew. Every single person on this ship, 1,800 of them, dead in under 3 minutes." He said it matter-of-factly, with the flatness of old grief that has been processed so many times it has worn smooth. "And Holly kept me in stasis until the radiation dispersed to a safe level." He looked at Kirk. "That took 3 million years." The briefing room was quiet for a moment. Even the cat stopped examining his reflection. 3 million years, Kirk said. 3,187,000 years, give or take, Holly said from the screen. "I kept count. It felt important. When I woke up," Lister continued, "everyone was dead. Earth was... We don't actually know what Earth is now. We've been trying to get back ever since. That was the plan. Get back to Earth, or at least back to something. See if there's anything left." He looked at the table. "There's just us, the 4 of us. Me, Rimmer, Cat, and Crichton. And Holly," Crichton added with the gentle urgency of someone who didn't want anyone to be left out. "Ashu and Holly," Lister agreed. Kirk looked at Spock. Spock looked at his tricorder and gave a small, precise nod that confirmed the story's broad outlines matched the sensor data. Kirk looked back at Lister, and he looked at him for a moment with the quiet attention of a man recalibrating his understanding of what he was dealing with. Lister didn't look like a hero. He didn't carry himself like a survivor in any of the ways that Kirk had seen survivors carry themselves. The hardness, the wariness, the perpetual readiness. He just looked like a man who had woken up from a long sleep to find the world gone and had decided, in the absence of better options, to keep going. Kirk recognized something in that. He wasn't sure he could have named it. "I'm sorry," Kirk said, and he meant it with the directness of a man who understood loss. Lister shrugged. "It's all right. Well, it's not all right, but it's, it is what it is." He picked up his beer. "So, you said Federation. What's that then?" The next 40 minutes were, by any measure, among the stranger briefings Kirk had conducted. He and Spock outlined, concisely, accurately, with Spock providing dates and Bones occasionally editorializing about Federation policy in ways that were not strictly necessary, but were, Kirk had long since accepted, impossible to prevent. The broad shape of the Federation, its member worlds, its principles, its technology, its history, from approximately the point where Red Dwarf had last been contemporary. Lister listened with focused, intelligent attention, asking questions that were simple in phrasing, but often sharp in implication. He wanted to know about wars, not with the hunger of a man who liked wars, but with the quiet concern of someone mapping danger. He wanted to know about Earth, which Spock confirmed still existed and was thriving. And something moved briefly across Lister's face at this information that was too complicated to be simply relief. He wanted to know about the Prime Directive, which Spock explained, and Rimmer immediately declared to be eminently sensible and the kind of policy that people of genuine authority and vision would naturally support, which Bones interpreted correctly as Rimmer having not understood it at all. Rimmer, for his part, had been conducting what appeared to be a parallel briefing of himself, taking notes on his PADD with the focused energy of a man who believed that information was power and that power was the thing standing between him and the life he deserved. He had asked 3 questions. The first was about Starfleet's command structure, and specifically whether there was a fast-track promotion pathway for holographic officers with extensive theoretical knowledge of military strategy. The second was about whether the Federation had resolved its Klingon situation, which he asked with the tone of a man inquiring about a problem he felt sure a better class of people would have sorted out. The third was about billeting arrangements, specifically whether Starfleet officers of his rank would be entitled to private quarters, because the bunk arrangements on Red Dwarf had always been, in his view, beneath his dignity. Spock answered the first and third questions with the careful neutrality of a diplomat. He answered the second with characteristic precision. Federation-Klingon relations remain, at this stardate, significantly complex, Spock said. The Organian Peace Treaty has established a framework, but tensions remain active along multiple border sectors. The Klingon Empire regards the current situation as Klingons, Rimmer said, and wrote it on his PADD in capital letters and underlined it twice. Right. So there are Klingons. There are Klingons, Kirk confirmed, and they're a problem. They're a complication. For everyone, or specifically for you? At this particular moment, Kirk said, I would say specifically for us, yes. He said it calmly, with the mild precision of a man reporting a weather condition, and it was therefore several seconds before the implications arrived in the room. Bones looked up. Spock straightened fractionally. Lister's eyes sharpened. Define specifically, Lister said. Kirk glanced at Spock, who turned his tricorder screen to face the table. On it, rendered in the blue topography of long-range sensor data, was a display showing the Enterprise's position, Red Dwarf's position, and, at the edge of the sensor range, moving with the deliberate, unhurried patience of a predator that has not yet decided whether to bother, the unmistakable configuration of a Klingon D-7 class battlecruiser. They've been tracking the quantum anomaly that brought you here, Kirk said. Whatever energy signature your ship produces, it was visible across a considerable range of space. The Klingons detected it before we did. But we were closer. They've been hanging back, assessing. Assessing what? Lister asked. Whether you're a threat, whether you're an opportunity, whether you're something worth taking. Kirk looked at the sensor display. The IKS Kartok, Commander Koloth's ship. He's a patient man, which makes him more dangerous than most. He looked up at Lister. He'll have a complete sensor profile of Red Dwarf by now. Your dimensions, your drive signature, your power output. He'll know the ship is old. He'll want to know why it came through an anomaly. A beat. He'll want to know if there's anything aboard worth having. The room processed this. Right, said Lister, in the tone of a man who has just been handed another thing to deal with and is adding it to a pile that was already substantial. He looked at Kat, who had straightened from the wall with the fluid alertness of a predator who has just heard something interesting. He looked at Crichton, who had gone the specific shade of anxious that suggested his guilt chip had identified a potential scenario in which he might be partly responsible for something and was preemptively preparing an apology. He looked at Rimmer. Rimmer was still writing on his PADD. Then he looked up, read the room, looked at the sensor display, and made the face of a man who has just realized that his agenda for the meeting has been rendered academic. Klingons, Rimmer said again. Yeah, said Lister. Actual Klingons. Apparently. Rimmer put the pen down very carefully, in the manner of a man setting aside the world he had planned to live in and preparing, with minimal grace, each to deal with the world that actually existed. I want it on record, he said with great precision, that this is not what I would have recommended. From the wall screen, Holly regarded the sensor display with the calm of 3 million years of perspective. For what it's worth, Holly said, I'd have recommended not flying into the anomaly in the first place, but nobody asked me. The Klingon battlecruiser held its position at the edge of sensor range with the particular patience of a warrior culture that understood the tactical value of letting uncertainty do its work. The IKS Kartok was a D7 class vessel, angular, predatory, built along the aesthetic philosophy of a civilization that had decided intimidation was a design principle, and it sat against the stars like a drawn fist, not moving, not hailing, simply watching. Now, Commander Koloth was, as Kirk had noted, a patient man. He had served the Empire for 30 years by understanding that the most dangerous moment in any engagement was not the moment of attack, but the moment before it, when the opponent was still deciding what they were dealing with. He was, at this moment, deciding what he was dealing with. On the Enterprise's bridge, Lieutenant Uhura monitored the Klingon communications frequencies with the focused precision that made her, in Kirk's considered opinion, one of the finest officers in Starfleet. She had 3 distinct intercepts running simultaneously, cross-referencing them against the ship's translation matrices, and the picture assembling itself from those fragments was not a comfortable one. They're running a full sensor sweep of Red Dwarf, she reported, our fingers moving across her console with practiced economy. Structural analysis, power signature mapping, interior configuration scan. They're being thorough, Captain. This isn't a casual look. They're building a complete tactical profile. Any communications to Klingon Command? Kirk asked. Encrypted burst transmission about 40 minutes ago. I've got fragments, the word for anomaly, the word for ancient, and she paused, listening. The word for opportunity, that one came through clearly. Kirk absorbed this from where he stood at the science station, watching the long-range display with his arms crossed, and the specific quality of stillness he adopted when he was thinking fast and didn't want anyone to know he was thinking fast. Beside him, Spock ran his own analysis with the quiet industry of a man for whom problems were simply puzzles that hadn't been solved yet. And the fact that this particular puzzle involved a 3-million-year-old mining ship, a crew of 4 extraordinary individuals, and a Klingon commander with 30 years of experience was simply a feature of the puzzle's complexity rather than a reason for concern. They won't attack yet, Spock said, without looking up. The sensor sweep indicates they are still in the assessment phase. Commander Koloth is gathering information before committing to a course of action. It is the tactically sound approach. How long before he finishes assessing? Kirk asked. At current sweep intensity and given the size of Red Dwarf's hull, approximately 4 hours. Possibly less if he concentrates his sensors on the vessel's propulsion and weapon systems, which represent the strategic variables of greatest interest to a Klingon commander. Weapon systems, Kirk said, and there was a specific quality in his voice that Bones, sitting in the observer's chair near the turbolift, recognized as the captain privately finding something funny in a situation that was not funny. Red Dwarf has weapon systems, Spock confirmed. Of a sort. The ship carries mining laser arrays rated for asteroid processing. They have a range of approximately 200 meters and a power output sufficient to do absolutely nothing to a Klingon battlecruiser, Bones said. To do, as you say, approximately nothing. Spock set down his tricorder. In a direct military confrontation, Red Dwarf represents no meaningful tactical capability. Its value to the Klingons lies elsewhere. The technology, Kirk said, partially. The ship's age makes its propulsion architecture of considerable interest. A 3-million-year operational history provides engineering data of extraordinary scope. But more significantly, Spock turned to face Kirk fully, which he did rarely enough that it always carried weight. The crew, a self-sustaining holographic projection of the sophistication Rimmer represents, is decades beyond current Federation capability. Creighton's mechanoid architecture is unlike any artificial intelligence in our database, and the evolutionary pathway represented by the cat species, He paused. Any of these individually would be of significant scientific and intelligence interest to the Klingon Empire. Together, they represent a considerable prize. Kirk was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Chekhov. Get me a secure channel to Red Dwarf. Route it through our encryption protocols, not theirs. I don't want the Klingons reading this. Aye, Captain. On Red Dwarf, the communication came through on the screen in the sleeping quarters corridor, where Lister had retreated after the briefing to think with the aid of a fresh beer and the comfortable background noise of the ship's systems, the deep mechanical breathing of the ventilation, the distant rhythm of the drive, sounds he had lived with so long they had become indistinguishable from silence. He accepted the channel with a tap of Holly's interface. Now and Kirk's face appeared on the battered screen with the calm authority of a man who had organized his thoughts and was ready to share them in a specific order. I wanted to brief you privately, Kirk said. Before your crew, before Rimmer specifically, here's the tactical picture. Lister raised his eyebrows. You've met him for about an hour, and you've already figured out the Rimmer problem. I've been a commanding officer for a long time. Fair enough. Lister settled onto the edge of his bunk. Go on then. Kirk explained the Klingon situation with the directness he reserved for conversations where sugarcoating would cost more than it saved. The Kartok, Koloth, the sensor sweep, the encrypted transmission to Klingon command. He laid it out plainly and watched Lister's face process it with that same careful and intelligent attention he'd shown in the briefing room. Not panicking, not deflating, just integrating the information into his existing map of how bad things could get and adjusting the map accordingly. So they want us, Lister said when Kirk finished. They want what you represent, which amounts to the same thing from their perspective. What do we do? That depends on what you want to do, Kirk said, and I want to be clear about that. What you want to do. You're not Starfleet. You're not bound by our protocols or our treaties. Red Dwarf is a sovereign vessel, whatever era it belongs to, and the people on it get to make their own choices. Lister looked at him. But your ship can't fight a Klingon battlecruiser. Your technology, as impressive as it is in certain respects, isn't military technology. Why, if the Kartok decides to stop assessing and start acting, there isn't a version of that which ends well for your crew without Federation support. So you're saying we need you. I'm saying the situation is what it is. The Enterprise can protect Red Dwarf. We have the weapons, the shields, the tactical capability to put ourselves between your ship and Koloth if it comes to that. What I'm asking is whether you want that protection and what you'd be willing to do in return. Lister was quiet for a moment. He looked at the beer in his hand, then at the wall, then back at Kirk with the expression of a man who had learned through considerable experience to be careful about what he agreed to and who he agreed to it with. What would we have to do, he asked. Talk to my science officer, Kirk said. We let Spock and your ship's computer share navigational data. We need to understand the anomaly that brought you here. If it's a stable quantum tunnel, there's a possibility we can use it. If it's collapsed, we need to know that too. Beyond that, he paused. I'd want Critton to work with our chief engineer. The mechanoid's technical knowledge of Red Dwarf systems could be critical if we need to move quickly. Scotty won't know what to make of Critton, Lister said, with the faint smile of someone who had already pictured this. No, Kirk agreed. But Scotty never met a piece of engineering he couldn't find something to respect in. They'll manage. He looked at Lister steadily. What do you say? Let me talk to the others. Of course, a beat. Talk to Lister first, then Kat and Critton. To tell Rimmer last and let him think he's been included in a command-level decision. Lister stared at him. Then he laughed. A genuine, unpracticed laugh that transformed his face entirely, momentarily burning away the accumulated weariness and showing the person underneath. Yeah, Lister said. All right, deal. The meeting with Rimmer went approximately as predicted. It was conducted in the midsection recreation room, a space that had been, in Red Dwarf's operational prime, a moderately pleasant crew lounge, and that was now a monument to the specific aesthetic that develops when four people with very different ideas about comfort share a space for several years with no prospect of outside input. Lister had explained the situation with characteristic directness. Critton had listened with focused attention and immediately begun cataloging technical questions he wanted to ask Scotty. The cat had listened with one ear while examining a crack in his manicure and had eventually summarized his position as, If the lumpy forehead people come anywhere near this suit, I will deal with them personally," which everyone present understood as his version of a combat readiness assessment. Rimmer had listened in silence, which was unusual enough to be concerning, and then had spoken for 4 minutes without pause. The substance of the 4 minutes was, in essence, the Klingon situation was serious. It required leadership of the highest caliber. Rimmer had studied military strategy extensively in his spare time and could provide that leadership. Kirk seemed competent enough, but was clearly operating without the benefit of Rimmer's specific insights. The correct tactical approach was to open immediate negotiations from a position of artificial strength by pretending Red Dwarf had weapon systems that it did not in fact have. And furthermore, this entire situation could have been avoided if people had listened to Rimmer's earlier recommendations, which he acknowledged he hadn't made yet, but felt he would have made it fast. When he finished, the room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when a storm has passed, and everyone is waiting to see if another one is coming. "Right," said Lister. "So you're on board then?" "I have reservations," Rimmer said. "Sure, you always have reservations. Because I am a man of discernment and strategic vision and—" "Rimmer." "Yes? Are you on board?" A pause. Rimmer looked at the table. He looked at the wall. He looked at the door with the expression of a man calculating whether there was an exit strategy and concluding there wasn't. He looked back at Lister with the specific expression he wore when he had decided to agree with something and was furious about it. "Fine," he said, "but I want my tactical input formally recorded." "Holly," Lister said. "Recorded," Holly said from the nearest screen. "There," said Lister. "Done." Crichton arrived in the Enterprise's engineering section at 1400 hours ship's time, escorted by Ensign Takahashi, who had drawn the assignment and was now regretting it in the specific way of someone who had expected a simple escort job and was instead walking beside a mechanoid who had asked 47 questions since leaving the transporter room, each one more technically detailed than the last, and who had apologized for each question immediately after asking it and then asked another one anyway. Montgomery Scott was standing at the Master Systems display when the doors opened, and he turned with the reflexive wariness of a chief engineer whose territory was about to be invaded by someone he hadn't vetted yet. One, he had been briefed, Kirk had been thorough about that, and he had spent the intervening time reviewing the sensor data on Red Dwarf's drive systems with the focused intensity of a man who has been told something impossible and is methodically constructing a framework for believing it. He was not, by nature, a man who dismissed things simply because they were impossible. Impossibility was, in Scotty's experience, largely a matter of not having tried hard enough yet. He looked at Crichton. Crichton looked at him. "You're the engineer," Crichton said, with the reverence of a priest addressing a higher authority. "Aye," said Scotty. "I've read about you." "Well, Holly briefed me on you, briefly, in the last 20 minutes. A pause. "I'm sorry, I'm being forward. I apologize, I'm Crichton. I'm the mechanoid service technician aboard Red Dwarf. I maintain all ship systems, conduct all repairs, prepare all meals, perform all domestic cleaning, provide medical support within my programming parameters, and handle all crew welfare requirements." He paused again. "I also apologize for things that aren't my fault, which I'm told is a character flaw." Scotty stared at him for a moment. Then he said, in the tone of a man who has just heard a description of a workload and wants to confirm he has understood it correctly, "You do all of that? Yourself? For the whole ship?" "There are only 4 crew members," Crichton said, with the modesty of someone who doesn't want to make a fuss about it. "That ship is 6 kilometers long." "Yes." A beat. Well, I keep to a schedule." Scotty was quiet for a moment that had the specific quality of professional respect assembling itself from unexpected raw materials. He had met a great many engineers, a great many artificial intelligences, and a great many beings who claimed capabilities that turned out to be somewhat less impressive under examination. Something in the straightforward precision of Crichton's manner, combined with the sheer audacity of the workload he had described, suggested to Scotty's finely calibrated instinct for competence that this particular claim was not only true, but possibly an understatement. "Right then," Scotty said, and stepped back from the master display to give Crichton a clear view of it. "Let's start with your drive system. Because the sensor data we pulled suggests you're running a hydrogen ram scoop of a design that by rights shouldn't be functional after 6 months, let alone 3 million years, and I want to know how you managed it." Creighton stepped forward to the display, and his face, those articulated plates that had been arranged in permanent apologetic anxiety since his arrival, did something that Scotty recognized immediately because he had felt it himself many times, standing in front of a problem worth solving. It lit up. "Oh," said Crichton, with the quiet joy of a being who has just found someone who speaks his language. "Well, it started with a fundamental redesign of the magnetic field coil geometry in approximately year 47 of the voyage. Oh, I noticed that the standard configuration was producing unnecessary turbulence in the intake manifold during—" Scotty pulled up a stool. This, his expression said, was going to take a while, and he could not think of a better use of his time. From the doorway, Ensign Takahashi watched two engineers from 3 million years apart settle into the timeless, borderless, entirely absorbing conversation of people who care deeply about how things work. He stood there for a moment, decided there was nothing here that required his presence, and quietly left, thinking to himself that he had just witnessed something he couldn't quite name, but that felt unmistakably like the beginning of something. The observation lounge on Deck 7 of the USS Enterprise was one of the ship's quieter spaces, a long, curved room with a sweep of reinforced viewport that offered an uninterrupted view of the stars, furnished with the restrained elegance of Federation design philosophy, which held that a space intended for contemplation should feel like contemplation rather than a waiting room. It was used for senior staff briefings when the formality of the main briefing room felt excessive, for diplomatic conversations that needed a human atmosphere rather than an institutional one, and occasionally, late in the ship's night cycle, by officers who needed to sit with the stars for a while and think. Spock found it useful for a different reason. The observation lounge was, by the acoustic geometry of the ship's construction, almost entirely isolated from the background noise of the Enterprise's systems. The hum of the warp drive, the circulatory murmur of the life support network, the thousand small sounds that a living starship made in the course of being alive. In the observation lounge, there was only the silence of space and the soft sound of thinking. He had requisitioned it for the afternoon. Across the table from him sat Holly. Not a physical Holly. The Red Dwarf's computer had no mobile projection capability of the kind that Rimmer's hard light system used, but a Holly rendered on a large portable display that Creighton had brought over on the shuttle, along with 17 other items of equipment and an apparently inexhaustible supply of apology. And the display sat propped against the viewport with the slightly incongruous quality of a picture frame leaning against a grand piano. And Holly's face occupied it with the relaxed presence of a being for whom physical constraints had always been somewhat notional. They had been talking for 2 hours. Or rather, Spock had been asking questions of extraordinary technical precision, and Holly had been answering them with a combination of genuine intellectual depth and a delivery style that Spock was still calibrating. Holly's manner was, by Vulcan standards, almost aggressively casual. The flat effect, the apparent disinterest, the habit of arriving at profound observations via routes that appeared to pass through complete indifference. Spock had initially assessed this as evidence of cognitive limitation, and he had revised this assessment substantially in the first 20 minutes and had spent the subsequent time recalibrating his model of what superior intelligence looked like when it had spent 3 million years largely talking to itself. "The anomaly," Spock said for the 4th time, approaching the question from a new angle the way a geologist approaches a fault line, carefully with full awareness that the ground might shift. "Your navigational data shows a consistent quantum variance in the region of your emergence point. The variance pattern is not random. It follows a mathematical structure." "Yeah," Holly said. "The structure is consistent with a stable quantum tunnel rather than a spontaneous rupture." "Yeah," Holly said again, "which means it may be traversable in reverse." "Might be," Holly said. "Depends on a few things." "Specify." Holly was quiet for a moment in the way of someone deciding how much to share and in what order. It was, Spock noted, a very human pause. The pause of a being that had made a calculation and was now deciding whether to reveal the calculation or just the conclusion. "The tunnel we came through," Holly said, "wasn't random. I've had a look at the data from your sensors combined with mine, and the picture's a bit more complicated than quantum anomaly opens, Red Dwarf falls through. The tunnel had a point of origin, a beat. Something generated it, deliberately." Spock was still for a moment in a way that was different from his normal stillness. Not the stillness of discipline, but the stillness of a mind that has just received a piece of information that reorganizes everything around it. Hey, you are suggesting the emergence was intentional, Spock said. I'm suggesting the tunnel was artificial, Holly corrected, with the precision of a 6,000 IQ being who considers the distinction important. Whether whoever made it intended to pull us through specifically, or whether we just happened to be in the wrong place when it opened. That I can't tell you. But something made it, and something on your side of the universe is putting out an energy signature that matches the tunnel's carrier frequency. Holly's face was, as always, almost entirely expressionless, which made the next sentence carry a particular weight. Something fairly close, actually. Spock looked at the viewport. Beyond it, in the middle distance, the Kartok continued its patient assessment of Red Dwarf, running its sensors across the ancient hull with the methodical thoroughness of an intelligence service doing its job. The Klingon vessel, Spock said. Their sensor sweep, Holly said. The frequency they're using for deep structural analysis? It matches. Exactly. Which is either a very significant coincidence? I do not believe in coincidence, Spock said. No, Holly said. I didn't think you would. A pause. Smart. Kirk received Spock's report on the observation lounge findings in his quarters at 1730, delivered with the characteristic economy of a first officer who knew his captain well enough to front-load the alarming parts. He sat with it for approximately 30 seconds, which was his version of a long pause. Koloth generated the anomaly, Kirk said. So the evidence suggests the Kartok sensor array was modified to produce a quantum tunneling frequency prior to their arrival in this sector, Spock said. The modification would require access to theoretical physics research considerably beyond current standard Klingon engineering capability. Research that Starfleet intelligence has suspected the Klingon Science Institute has been pursuing in secret for approximately 3 years. Quantum tunneling as a weapons delivery system, Kirk said, or as a retrieval mechanism, Spock said. The theory, as I understand the Klingon strategic intent, would be to open a controlled quantum tunnel into an adjacent dimensional space and draw through any technology or resources present there. A form of interdimensional salvage, if one wishes to be reductive about it. They were fishing, Kirk said. In a manner of speaking, Red Dwarf appears to have been caught in the tunnel's aperture by chance rather than design. The vessel happened to occupy the dimensional space that the Kartok was targeting. The Klingons would not have known what to expect. What they received was considerably more interesting than anything they were likely anticipating. Spock paused. Which explains Koloth's caution. He has caught something he does not fully understand, and he is a thorough enough commander to understand it before acting. Kirk stood and moved to his viewport, looking out at the stars with the focused abstraction of a man assembling a tactical picture. Can we use this? The tunnel, if Koloth generated it, can we use the same frequency to reopen it? With Holly's navigational data and our own sensor readings, I believe so. The mathematics are complex but tractable. Spock folded his hands with the precision of a man about to deliver the part of the report that complicates the good news. However, reopening the tunnel requires generating a matching quantum frequency from our end, a process that would be immediately detectable by the Kartok. The moment we begin the attempt, Koloth will know what we are doing, and he will know that we are attempting to send Red Dwarf home. Which he won't allow, Kirk said. He has invested considerable resources and technological risk in generating that tunnel. Red Dwarf represents the return on that investment. He will not permit us to remove it. Spock let this land. The window for action is narrow, Captain. Once Koloth completes his sensor sweep and transmits a full report to Klingon Command, the Empire will dispatch additional vessels. At that point, the tactical situation changes from manageable to significantly less so. How long? Perhaps 6 hours, possibly less if Koloth decides the transmission is more urgent than the completeness of his data. Kirk turned from the viewport. His expression had the specific quality that Bones called his, "I've just decided to do something Starfleet will have opinions about" face. A focused clarity, a slight compression around the eyes, the look of a man who has run the options and identified the least bad one and is now committed to it entirely. "Fine, Bones," he said. "Tell him to meet me in sickbay and get me Lister on a secure channel." He was already moving. "We have a lot to do in 6 hours." In sickbay, the encounter between Dr. Leonard McCoy and the cat had been ongoing for approximately 40 minutes and had the quality of a diplomatic incident that hadn't quite decided whether it was going to resolve itself through dialogue or through one of the participants leaving an outrage. The cat had submitted to a medical examination with the specific attitude of someone doing the universe a favor by existing and expecting appropriate recognition of this fact. He had answered McCoy's questions with the air of a being for whom questions were an imposition unless they were about him, in which case they were welcome but needed to be phrased correctly. He had objected to the medical tricorder on the grounds that it made an unflattering sound when directed at his face, had required reassurance 3 times that the biobed's diagnostic field would not interfere with his hair, and had at one point simply stopped participating in the examination entirely because he had spotted his reflection in a piece of medical equipment and become absorbed in it. McCoy, who had examined beings ranging from silicon-based crystalline entities to beings of pure energy, and who had developed over the years a comprehensive tolerance for difficult patients, had conducted the examination with gritted professional patience, and had arrived at findings that he was now reviewing with the focused attention of a scientist who suspects he is looking at something genuinely important. "Your metabolism," McCoy said, pulling up the analysis on his screen and turning it toward the cat, who showed every sign of being interested in it, only if it said flattering things, "is unlike anything I've cataloged. Your caloric processing rate is approximately 4 times that of a baseline human, but your energy storage efficiency is... This can't be right." He ran the scan again. "Your body converts approximately 94% of consumed calories directly to usable energy with almost no waste production." "That's incredible," the cat suggested. "I was going to say physiologically impossible," McCoy said, "but incredible covers it." "I know," the cat said, with the satisfaction of someone receiving confirmation of something they have always known. "I'm a miracle." "You're an evolutionary phenomenon," McCoy said, with the careful precision of a man who has decided to preserve the distinction between the two. He pulled up another scan. "Your sensory processing is extraordinary. Visual acuity approximately 8 times human standard, olfactory range that would put a bloodhound to shame, auditory sensitivity that..." He stopped. He looked at the scan. He looked at the cat. "You're hearing right now. You can hear the Klingon ship's drive frequency from here, can't you?" The cat's eyes, which had been at half-mast with the casual ease of a being fundamentally at rest, sharpened slightly. He tilted his head. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but McCoy had spent enough time around beings with enhanced senses to recognize the specific quality of focused attention. "Yeah," the cat said slowly, "I can hear something. 2 things. One's the big ship out there. It's got to sound like..." He made a sound in his throat that was not quite a growl and not quite a purr, and was entirely unlike anything McCoy's human auditory system could have produced. "Like that, low, patient, and then there's something else." His eyes narrowed further. "Something further away, same rhythm, like it's answering." McCoy was on his feet before the cat finished the sentence, hitting his communicator with the practiced speed of a doctor who has learned that the interval between information and action is where people get hurt. "McCoy to Kirk." Kirk's voice came back immediately, tight with the quality of someone already managing multiple threads. "Go ahead, Bones." "You need to hear what the cat just told me," McCoy said. "Right now, Jim, because if I'm reading this correctly, Koloth isn't working alone." The silence on the channel had the specific texture of a commanding officer revising his tactical picture at speed. "On my way," Kirk said. In engineering, Scotty and Crichton had been deep in the technical archaeology of Red Dwarf's drive systems for 3 hours and had arrived at a state of collaborative absorption that transcended the 3-million-year gap in their engineering vocabularies. They had developed a working shorthand. Crichton would describe a system in his terminology. Scotty would map it to his own framework. They would find the correspondence and build from there. And the master display between them was now covered in a palimpsest of annotations in 2 distinct handwriting styles that were, despite everything, surprisingly compatible. "Should we the magnetic containment geometry here?" Scotty said, tracing a line on the display with one finger. "You said you redesigned it in year 47? "Year 47 of my operation, yes," Crichton said. The original configuration was producing a resonance harmonic in the tertiary coils that was, well, it was catastrophic in theory, although in practice it had been running for 47 years without incident, which suggested to me that either the theory was wrong or the practice was luckier than it had any right to be. He paused. I assumed the latter and fixed it. Scotty looked at him. You diagnosed a fundamental design flaw in a drive system that had been running for 47 years, without any engineering support, without a second opinion, and you fixed it. I had Holly, Crichton said, with the modesty of someone who considers this adequate qualification. What did Holly contribute? Crichton paused. Holly told me the theory was probably wrong and that I should leave it alone. Scotty laughed. A short, genuine laugh that Crichton had not been expecting, and that caused his guilt chip to briefly wonder if he had said something wrong before his social subroutines correctly identified it as appreciation. And what made you ignore that advice? Scotty asked. I had a feeling, Crichton said, and then looked immediately troubled by having said so. Which is, I recognize that feelings are not an engineering methodology, and I apologize for— Don't apologize, Scotty said firmly. In my experience, no, the best engineering is half mathematics and half something that feels exactly like a feeling and that the textbooks don't have a word for. He looked back at the display. You saved this ship. Crichton was quiet for a moment. His articulated face did the thing it had done when they first began working together. That quality of lighting up, but more slowly this time, warmer, the way a room fills with light when a door is opened, rather than a switch thrown. Nobody has ever said that to me before, he said. Scotty looked at him with the direct simplicity of a man who means what he says and says what he means. Well, he said, it's true. Before either of them could continue, the ship's intercom opened with the specific urgency of a captain who has reclassified the situation. Kirk to all senior staff, red alert. I need everyone in the main briefing room in 10 minutes. A beat that carried the weight of what was coming. And someone bring the cat. Dr. McCoy will explain why. Scotty and Crichton looked at each other across 3 million years of engineering history and the shared understanding of people who know that the work they were doing is about to become more urgent than they had thought. Come on then, Scotty said, and reached for his communicator. Crichton was already compiling his notes, apologizing to the display as he closed it, and following. The main briefing room of the USS Enterprise felt, at this particular moment, like a space that had been designed for exactly this kind of impossible situation and was nevertheless finding it a stretch. The table seated 12 comfortably and was currently accommodating Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, Uhura, Chekhov, and, arranged along one side with the specific energy of people who have been brought into a room and told it is important without being told why, Lister, Rimmer, the cat, and Crichton. Holly occupied a display screen at the far end, next to the main view screen, which currently showed the long-range sensor display with the Kartok's position marked in amber and, new since the last briefing, a second contact marked in red at the extreme edge of detection range. The second contact was the problem. Kirk stood at the head of the table with the focused economy of a man who has organized his thoughts into the order that will cause the least panic while conveying the full weight of the situation, which was a skill that took years to develop and that he was currently deploying at full capacity. 40 minutes ago, he began, Dr. McCoy's examination of our guest, a nod toward the cat, who acknowledged this with the regal inclination of someone accepting a tribute, produced an unexpected intelligence asset. The cat's auditory sensitivity is approximately 8 times human standard, and he detected a drive frequency at extreme range that our sensors had not yet resolved as a discrete contact. Kirk touched the control at his end of the table, and the view screen shifted to a cleaner display. The two contacts now shown in relation to each other and to the Enterprise and Red Dwarf. Spock. Spock rose with the unhurried precision of a man for whom standing up was a considered action. The second contact is a Klingon vessel. Preliminary analysis suggests a D5 class cruiser, one older than the Kartok and carrying a smaller crew complement, but heavily armed. Its drive frequency is running at a modulated harmonic that is specifically designed to be difficult to detect at range, a technique Klingon intelligence has been developing for covert insertion operations. He paused. The modulation matches a frequency pattern that Starfleet intelligence has associated with the Klingon Empire's Thought Admiral Division, a covert operations branch that operates independently of the standard military command structure. Thought Admiral, Rimmer said, leaning forward with the expression of a man who has heard something alarming and is attempting to process it through the framework of someone who has read a great many books about military history and is now discovering that the books were somewhat less comprehensive than advertised. That sounds significantly worse than regular Admiral. It is significantly worse, Kirk said without particular drama. The Thought Admiral Division operates outside standard Empire protocols. They don't answer to the High Council. They run independent operations with independent resources and independent ethics. He said the last word in the specific way of a man who means the opposite of what the word normally implies. The question is what they're doing here, and the answer, based on the timeline, is that they're here because of the tunnel. Koloth reported to them, Spock said, not to Klingon command. The encrypted burst transmission we intercepted was not going to the standard military frequencies. It was going to a Thought Admiral relay point approximately 4 light years from our position. The response came back within 20 minutes, which means the relay was expecting it. He looked along the table. This operation was planned. The quantum tunneling experiment was a Thought Admiral project. Koloth is not operating independently. He is working for them. The briefing room processed this in various ways. Kirk watched the faces around the table with the attention of a conductor, watching an orchestra navigate a difficult passage. The professional absorption of Uhura, already mentally rerouting her communications monitoring to cover the new contact. Chekhov's navigator's instinct already working through approach vectors and escape corridors. Scotty's particular brand of focused anxiety that meant he was calculating power requirements for scenarios he hoped wouldn't be necessary. On the Red Dwarf side of the table, Lister was doing the careful, intelligent processing that Kirk had come to expect from him. Crichton had produced a small notepad from somewhere and was taking notes with the earnest focus of a student in an important lecture. The cat was watching the view screen with the fixed, unblinking attention of a predator that has identified a threat and is waiting for it to make a mistake. Rimmer was doing something more complicated. Rimmer's face was, at this moment, in a landscape of competing weather systems. There was fear. He was not, whatever else could be said about him, someone who processed danger slowly. And there was the particular strain of a man whose instinct was to perform confidence while feeling the opposite. And there was something underneath both of those that Kirk had not expected and that he filed away carefully. A hard, bright kernel of something that looked, improbably, like anger. Not panic anger, considered anger. The anger of a man who has been dragged from his own time and his own universe, and is now being told that alien military intelligence wants to use him as a resource, and has just arrived at the conclusion that he objects to this. Kirk noted it. It would matter later. What do they want with us specifically? Lister asked. The same things Koloth wants, Kirk said. Aaron amplified. The Thought Admiral Division's mandate is the acquisition and weaponization of strategic assets beyond the Empire's current capability. Crichton's engineering knowledge, Holly's AI architecture, Rimmer's hard light technology. He paused. And you? Lister looked at him. Me? I'm a third technician. I fix chicken soup dispensers. You're the last human being alive from 3 million years in our past, Kirk said. From a Thought Admiral perspective, that makes you a biological artifact of incalculable value. Your genetic profile, your physiological data, your memories of an Earth that no longer exists in any recoverable form. He stopped himself from going further because Lister's expression had done something complicated, and Kirk had enough respect for the man to not make it worse. You're a prize, all of you are. And the Thought Admiral Division does not negotiate for prizes, it takes them. A silence settled over the table that had the specific quality of people recalibrating their understanding of how much trouble they were in. It was Holly who broke it. Can I say something? Holly said from the screen at the end of the table. Please, Kirk said. I've been running the numbers on the tunnel since Spock and I talked this afternoon, Holly said. And I want to be clear that when I say I've been running the numbers, I mean I've been running them continuously for about 4 hours, which is what happens when you give a 6,000 IQ something to actually think about for the first time in a while. A pause. The tunnel is still there. The room sharpened. The quantum variance that Spock and I identified in the emergence region, Holly continued, well, it hasn't collapsed. Normally, a tunnel of this type would decay within a few hours of opening. The quantum coherence can't be maintained without active generation. But this one is holding. Another pause, this one carrying the weight of something significant being delivered at Holly's characteristic unhurried pace. Because something is still generating it. The thought admiral ship, the covert vessel. It's not here to collect us. It's here to maintain the tunnel. It's a mobile anchor. Keep the tunnel open long enough for the Kartok to deliver us through it. They're going to take Red Dwarf back through the tunnel, Scotty said, back to wherever it came from, but on their terms, with their people aboard. Or just take what they want off it and let it collapse back, Lister said quietly. His voice was steady, but Kirk heard what was underneath it. Either way, Kirk said, we have a window. Holly, what do you need to generate the counter frequency? To send Red Dwarf back through on our terms rather than theirs? Theoretically, if I can use the Enterprise's main deflector to amplify my own signal. Spock and I worked out the mathematics this afternoon. I can generate a counter-resonance that opens the tunnel from this side. The Kartok's generation system and mine would create a constructive interference pattern that widens the aperture enough to bring Red Dwarf through cleanly. Holly's expression, as always, revealed almost nothing, but something in the delivery had the quality of a person who is proud of the work and is being restrained about it. It takes about 12 minutes to set up and about 4 minutes to execute. 16 minutes total, Kirk said, give or take. During which time Koloth knows exactly what we're doing and has every incentive to stop us. Yeah, Holly said, that part's your problem, I'm afraid. Kirk looked at Spock. Spock gave the small, precise nod that meant the mathematics were sound and the tactical problem was real, and he had not yet found a clean solution to the second part, but was working on it. Scotty, Kirk said, can you modify the main deflector to carry Holly's signal without compromising our shields? Scotty's expression went through the rapid internal calculation that always preceded either "aye, sir" or a speech about the laws of physics. It's not standard procedure, he said, which in Scotty's vocabulary meant it was possible, but would require things to be done to the Enterprise's systems that he would normally object to on principle. I'd need to reroute power from the secondary hull and drop shield efficiency to about 60% during the transmission window. He paused. And I'd need Crichton. Crichton looked up from his notepad with the expression of someone who has just been handed a responsibility and is simultaneously honored and terrified. I can help, Crichton said immediately. Then, I apologize. I know I can help with the drive frequency calculations. Whether I can help with the deflector modification specifically depends on whether the Enterprise's power coupling architecture is compatible with the interface methodology I'd be using, and I won't know that until I've had a look. Aaron, I apologize for not being more certain. Don't apologize, Scotty said for the second time that day, with the same firm simplicity. Come look. So the plan is, Lister said, leaning forward, elbows on the table, cutting through to the operational core the way he did when the situation had sharpened enough to require it. You use your big dish thing to send a signal that opens the tunnel, and we fly Red Dwarf through it, while a Klingon warship tries to stop you. That's the broad shape of it, Kirk said. And the second ship? The covert one? That's where it gets complicated, Kirk said. It's been complicated since we got here, Lister said, without rancor. More complicated then. Kirk looked at Spock. The Thought Admiral vessel is maintaining the tunnel. Homer, if it stops transmitting, if it powers down its generation system or is disabled, the tunnel collapses. Even if we open it from our side, without their anchor, the aperture won't be stable enough for a vessel the size of Red Dwarf to transit safely. So we need them to keep transmitting, Lister said. We need them to keep transmitting, Kirk confirmed, which means we can't disable them. We can't engage them. We need them operational and generating for the entire 16 minutes of the procedure. While also keeping the Kartok off our backs, McCoy said, with the expression of a man watching someone build a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Yes, Jim, Bones said. I want it on record. I know, Bones. I know. Bones sat back, completed a specific internal process that involved accepting the situation, and returned his attention to the table with the professional resignation of a man who has chosen his captain and intends to follow that choice all the way to its logical conclusion, wherever that might be. It was at this point that Rimmer spoke. He had been quiet for longer than anyone at the table, and certainly longer than anyone who knew him would have expected. He had his PADD open and his pen in his hand, and he had been writing during the briefing with the focused concentration of someone who was not taking notes but working through something independently. When he spoke, it was with a quality that none of the Red Dwarf crew had heard from him before in this context. And that stopped Lister in particular because he recognized it from the very rare occasions it had appeared before. The quality of Rimmer thinking rather than performing. The covert vessel, Rimmer said, the Thought Admiral ship, it's running a modulated harmonic to avoid detection. You said the modulation matches a specific pattern your intelligence services have on file. Correct, Spock said, with the slight additional attention he gave to unexpected contributions from unexpected sources. So they have a communication protocol, a specific frequency structure? Rimmer looked at Uhura. If you transmitted on that frequency, if you generated a signal that looked, from their perspective, like a communication from Koloth, what would they do? Uhura straightened. Her eyes moved to Kirk with the expression of a communications officer who has just heard an idea she wants to evaluate properly. They'd respond, she said slowly. Standard Thought Admiral protocol would require them to authenticate the contact before acting on it. That authentication process takes time, Rimmer said. 5 minutes minimum, Uhura said. Possibly closer to 8 if we can make the initial transmission complex enough to require multiple authentication steps. 8 minutes, Kirk said. He looked at Rimmer with an expression that was recalibrating itself in real time. That buys us halfway through the procedure before they realize what's happening. It's not a complete solution, Rimmer said, with the specific tone of someone who is aware that they have contributed something useful and is trying not to undermine it by being too obviously pleased about it. But it narrows the problem. He looked at his PADD. The remaining 8 minutes, the car talk problem, that requires something else. But the first 8 minutes, that's manageable. He set the pen down. Assuming your communications officer is as good as she appears to be. Uhura looked at Rimmer with an expression that contained, in equal measure, professional assessment and something that might have been the beginning of respect. I am considerably better than I appear to be, she said. Rimmer met her gaze and very briefly smiled. Not the performance smile he used when he was trying to impress people, but the smaller, rarer smile of a man who has encountered a peer. And I thought so, he said. Lister was staring at Rimmer with the specific expression of someone witnessing a phenomenon they have long considered theoretical. Did you just... Lister started. Don't, Rimmer said. You just actually... I'm warning you, Lister. That was genuinely brilliant, man. Rimmer looked at the table. Something moved across his face in the approximate direction of gratitude and then retreated behind its customary defenses. It was basic tactical analysis, he said. Any competent officer would have... Rimmer. What? Take it, Lister said. Just take it. A pause. The briefing room waited. Fine, Rimmer said, with enormous dignity. It was brilliant. From the display screen at the end of the table, Holly regarded the assembled company with the calm of a 6,000 IQ intelligence that has watched human beings being human beings for 3 million years and has never entirely stopped finding it interesting. Right, Holly said. So, are we doing this then? Kirk looked around the table, at his crew, at the Red Dwarf crew, at the strange and improbable assembly of a captain and his doctor and his engineer and his navigator, a slovenly immortal and his holographic companion and an evolved cat and a mechanoid who apologized for his own existence, at all of it. And he felt the specific feeling he always felt at the hinge point of an operation when the planning was done and the doing was about to begin. It was not quite excitement, it was not quite fear. It was the feeling of a man exactly in his element when you're about to step forward into the place where everything is decided. We're doing this, Kirk said. The preparation for an operation of this complexity had a rhythm to it that Kirk knew in his bones. The specific acceleration of a starship moving from planning to execution, when the abstract became concrete and every person aboard found their function and inhabited it with the focused intensity of someone who understood that the margin between success and failure was measured in seconds and centimeters. He had felt it before engagements with Romulan warbirds, before confrontations with beings of godlike power, before the desperate improvisations that had become in the telling, the legendary moments of the Enterprise's history. He had never felt it quite like this. The difference, he reflected. As he walked the corridor from the briefing room toward the bridge with Spock a half step behind him, was the texture of the crew. His crew he knew, their rhythms, their capabilities, their specific flavors of courage and competence. The Red Dwarf crew was something else, something he was still mapping, and the map every hour revealed more interesting terrain. "Spock," he said without breaking stride. "Captain, your honest assessment, not the diplomatic version." Spock was quiet for exactly the 3 seconds he needed to formulate honesty at the precision he required. "The plan has a reasonable probability of success," he said. "The variables that concern me are not the technical ones. Scotty and Crichton will manage the deflector modification. I am confident of that. Holly's signal calculations are sound. Lieutenant Uhura's capacity to execute the communications deception is not in question. A beat. The variable that concerns me is the 8-minute window after Koloth identifies what we are doing. In that window, the Kartok will move to intercept, and we will be defending the Enterprise, Red Dwarf, and the tunnel aperture simultaneously with 60% shield efficiency. We've defended worse with less, Kirk said. We have, Spock agreed. However, on those occasions, we were not also coordinating with a crew whose combat experience, while extensive, is of an entirely different character from anything in Starfleet's operational framework. Kirk thought about this. What's your read on them, honestly? Spock considered the question with the thoroughness it deserved. Lister, he said, is more capable than he presents himself. The self-deprecation is genuine, but it obscures a practical intelligence and a quality of decision-making under pressure that I find noteworthy. His instincts are sound. A pause. The cat's sensory capabilities represent a genuine tactical asset that we have not fully incorporated into our planning. His detection of the second vessel saved us several hours of dangerous uncertainty. Another pause, this one carrying the specific weight of a Vulcan choosing his words with particular care. Crichton is, by any measure, extraordinary. I have been reviewing the technical notes he and Mr. Scott produced this afternoon, and there are several approaches to the drive coupling problem that are genuinely innovative. He sees engineering relationships that trained Starfleet engineers have not identified. And Rimmer. The longest pause yet. Shido Arnold Rimmer, Spock said, is a complicated data point. That's a diplomatic answer. It is the most accurate answer I currently have. His tactical contribution in the briefing room was not the output of someone without ability. It was the output of someone whose ability has been consistently buried under other qualities. Spock paused. He reminds me, in certain respects, of officers I have served with who required the right conditions to function at their actual capacity rather than their habitual one. Whether those conditions can be created in the next 6 hours is an open question. Kirk thought about the hard, bright kernel of anger he had seen in Rimmer's face during the briefing. I think the conditions might be arriving on their own, he said. They reached the turbo lift. Kirk pressed the control and the doors opened with the familiar pneumatic sigh. One more thing, Spock said as they stepped in. Go ahead. I have been considering the ethical dimension of this operation since the briefing concluded. He said it with the quality of something that had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this corridor, this lift, was it. If we succeed in sending Red Dwarf back through the tunnel, if the crew returns to their own dimensional space, they return to a universe in which they are still 3 million years from home, still the last of their kind, still without a clear destination. He paused. The Federation could offer them more than a route home. It could offer them a home. Kirk looked at him. That is not my decision to make, Kirk said carefully. Or yours. No, Spock agreed. It is Lister's. I raise it only because, if it is to be offered, it should be offered before the operation begins. Once they are through the tunnel, the opportunity is gone. He folded his hands. It seemed worth noting. Kirk was quiet for a moment. The turbolift moved. It did, he said. Thank you, Spock. Engineering was, by 1900 hours, operating at a pitch that Scotty privately classified as productive chaos, a state he recognized and, if he was honest, thrived in, where every system was being pushed in a direction its designers had not anticipated, and the margin between triumph and catastrophe was exactly wide enough to be interesting. He had pulled 3 additional engineers from their duty shifts, and they were distributed around the section in a pattern that looked, to an outside observer like confusion. But that was in fact a precise allocation of expertise to problem. Ensign Park was managing the power rerouting from the secondary hull. Lieutenant Chen was modifying the deflector array, coupling with the careful hands of someone defusing something. Ensign Takahashi, who had drawn another unexpected assignment, was running diagnostic relays between the deflector control and the communications board on the bridge, maintaining the data pathway that Holly's signal would travel when the time came. And Crichton was everywhere. This was not metaphorical. Crichton's operational tempo, once focused on a specific engineering problem, turned out to be something that Scotty's team had not quite calibrated for. A mechanoid who did not tire, did not need brakes, could process multiple simultaneous technical streams, and who had 3 million years of creative improvisation in his operational memory had a different relationship with the concept of working quickly than biological engineers. He moved through the section with the fluid, purposeful efficiency of someone whose entire existence was organized around useful action. And he had an extraordinary quality of making himself useful without ever appearing to intrude. Appearing at a console exactly when the person at it needed a second pair of hands, identifying a problem in a system 3 stations away before anyone else had noticed it, producing from his chassis a specific tool that turned out to be exactly what was required with the matter-of-fact helpfulness of someone who has simply always been prepared. At one point, and Scotty looked up from the coupling modification and realized that Crichton had identified and resolved a power variance in the secondary EPS relay that, left unaddressed, would have caused a 15% efficiency drop in the deflector transmission at the critical moment, and had done it without mentioning it to anyone, without seeking credit, without pausing in the 4 other things he was simultaneously managing. "Crichton," Scotty said. Crichton looked up from the relay panel. "Yes, Mr. Scott, I apologize if I've overstepped. I noticed the variance and thought it better to address it immediately rather than—" "How did you know about the variance?" Scotty asked. "I hadn't run that diagnostic yet." Crichton paused. "I heard it," he said. When he heard it. The harmonic in the relay coil changes character when the resistance differential reaches a certain threshold. It produces a frequency shift of approximately 12 hertz that is, well, it's quite distinctive once you know what you're listening for. He paused again. "I've been listening to ship systems for a long time." Scotty stared at him for a moment, then he turned to Ensign Park. "Run that diagnostic I had scheduled for the secondary EPS relay." Park ran it, looked at the results, looked at Scotty. "It's clean, sir. Nominal across the board." "Because Crichton fixed it," Scotty said. Park looked at Crichton. Crichton looked at the floor with the expression of someone who has been noticed and is not entirely sure how to manage it. "Right," said Scotty quietly, to no one in particular. Then louder, "Right. Crichton, when we get through this, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the last 3 million years of your engineering log, because I think there are things in there that Starfleet would very much like to know about." He paused. "But first, the deflector." "The deflector," Crichton agreed, with the focused relief of someone returning to known ground. "Yes, I've been thinking about the phase alignment problem, and I believe I have an approach that might—" "Show me," Scotty said. Crichton showed him. On the bridge, Uhura was doing what she did best, which was to say she was inhabiting a communications problem so completely that the distinction between herself and the solution had effectively dissolved. The Thought Admiral communication protocol was, by any measure, a sophisticated piece of cryptographic engineering. It used a layered authentication structure with rotating key elements and a challenge response system designed to prevent exactly the kind of deception she was planning. She had spent 40 minutes mapping its architecture with the patient attention of a linguist approaching an unfamiliar language, not trying to force it into familiar frameworks, but listening for its own internal logic, its grammar, the way its elements related to each other. Because Uhura had always understood, in a way that the engineering minds around her sometimes didn't fully appreciate, that communication systems were not simply technical structures. They were expressions of the minds that built them. They had personalities, they had assumptions. And assumptions, if you listened carefully enough, were doors. The Thought Admiral protocol assumed, at its foundational level, that any communication attempting authentication was doing so in good faith. The challenge response system was designed to defeat random intrusion, someone stumbling across the frequency and transmitting noise. It was not designed with the same rigor to defeat someone who understood the protocol well enough to conduct an authentication that looked genuine while carrying a false payload. Because why would it need to be? The Thought Admiral Division operated in the deepest secrecy of the Klingon Empire. The assumption was that nobody outside that division would ever know enough about their protocols to attempt a sophisticated deception. Uhura was about to challenge that assumption on behalf of the Federation. She worked methodically, building the false transmission in layers. One, the carrier frequency she had from the intercepts. Rimmer's observation about the harmonic structure had given her the precise parameters she needed, and she had not forgotten to be grateful for that. The authentication header she constructed from fragments of the burst transmission they had captured 40 minutes ago, assembling the protocol elements with the careful precision of someone reconstructing a language from partial text. The content of the deception itself was the most delicate part. It needed to be complex enough to require multiple authentication cycles, specific enough to sound like genuine Thought Admiral communication, and ambiguous enough that when they eventually identified it as false, they would spend additional time trying to understand what information it had been attempting to convey. She had been composing deceptions in her head all her life, in the way that anyone who grew up at the intersection of multiple cultures learned to speak different truths in different registers without losing themselves in the translation. She had never expected this particular skill to matter in quite this way. Chekhov appeared at her station with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a navigator who has finished his approach vector calculations and has a few minutes before the operation begins. "How's it going?" he asked quietly, setting 1 cup beside her. "I need 4 more minutes," she said without looking up. "You have 23, he said. "Kirk's holding until Scotty confirms deflector readiness." "Then I need 4 more minutes and 19 minutes to be completely certain," she said. Chekhov smiled. "And I'll tell the Klingons to wait." "You do that," Uhura said and returned to her work. Lister found Kirk in the observation lounge at 1940, which was where Kirk had gone for 15 minutes of the particular quality of quiet that the room provided, and which Lister had located by the simple method of asking Holly where Kirk was and then going there. He knocked on the open door. Kirk looked around from the viewport. "Come in," Kirk said. Lister came in. He stood for a moment looking at the stars, the specific quality of attention that someone gives the universe when they are about to be sent back into it in a particular direction. And then he sat down in the chair across from Kirk's with the comfortable directness of a man who has decided to say something and is getting on with it. "Spock talked to me," Lister said. Kirk waited. "He asked about staying." Lister looked at the table. "About the Federation being an option instead of going back." He was quiet for a moment. He was very Spock about it, very logical, laid out the case, very even, didn't push. A pause. "But I could tell he meant it." "He did," Kirk said. "So do I. The offer is real." Lister looked at him. "Earth's still there," he said. "You told me that. 3 million years from now, Earth still exists." "It does. It's considerably different from what you remember, but it's there. Thriving." "So there's somewhere to go back to," Lister said. "Not my Earth, not my time, but something." He looked at the viewport. "That's all I've ever wanted, really. Something. Somewhere to be. Not necessarily perfect, just real. Solid. A something that isn't just the 4 of us rattling around in that great big ship going nowhere in particular." "You could have that here," Kirk said. "The Federation is built on exactly that. People from different times and places and species finding something to belong to." Lister smiled. The genuine one, the one that changed his whole face. "You're a good salesman, Captain." "I'm just describing what I've seen," Kirk said. A pause. Lister looked at the stars. "Cat won't go back," Lister said slowly. "I mean, he'd say he would, and then he wouldn't. He's never really cared about getting back to Earth. Earth doesn't mean anything to him. He's evolved past the point where it's his origin story. He's his own origin story," he thought. Cretan. Cretan would go wherever I told him to go and be happy about it. Which is exactly why I'd never make the decision for him." A pause. "Rimmer," he stopped. "Rimmer," Kirk said. "Rimmer has spent his entire existence trying to become something that gets respect. Lister said, with the quiet precision of someone who has known a person long enough to understand them past the point of judgment. He's brilliant in flashes and catastrophic in longer stretches, and he knows both of those things about himself, and he can't reconcile them. And it makes him Rimmer. He looked at Kirk. In your universe, with your Starfleet, is there actually a place for someone like that? Kirk thought about all the officers he had known, the ones who had started as one thing and become another, the ones whose capability had finally found the right conditions, the ones who had surprised him. In my experience, Kirk said, Starfleet has a remarkable capacity for taking people who don't fit anywhere and finding the exact place they fit. He paused. It doesn't always work, but it works more often than you'd expect. Lister was quiet for a long time. I need to talk to them, he said finally. Properly, all of them. Before we do this. He stood up. Is there time? Kirk checked his watch. Checked the tactical picture in his head against the preparation timeline. 15 minutes, he said. Make them count. Lister nodded. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Kirk, he said. Yes. Whatever happens, thank you for treating us like we matter, like we're real. He said it simply, without ceremony, the way he said most things. We've been out there a long time, just the four of us. It's easy to forget that you're real when there's nobody to reflect it back at you. Kirk looked at him. This rumpled, beery, brilliant, lost man who had woken up 3 million years from home and kept going anyway, and felt something that he was not going to name because naming it would make the next part harder. You're real, Kirk said. All of you. Lister nodded once, precisely, and left. Kirk turned back to the viewport. The stars were exactly where they had always been, indifferent and magnificent and full of the particular promise that had brought him out here in the first place and kept him here through everything that had tried to send him back. His communicator chirped. Scotty to Captain Kirk. Kirk here. Deflector modification is complete, sir. Holly's signal pathway is live and tested. Crichton and I have run 3 verification cycles, and she's holding steady. A pause that contained Scotty's particular flavor of pride. The pride of a man who has done something difficult and done it right. We're ready when you are, Captain. Kirk looked at the stars for one more second. On my way, he said. The bridge of the USS Enterprise at Red Alert was a different organism from the bridge at routine operations. The same space, the same consoles, the same people, but transformed by urgency into something tighter and more purposeful. Every system primed, every officer inhabiting their station with the complete attention of someone who understands that the next hour will require everything they have. The lights had shifted to the amber-red wash of alert status. And in that light, the bridge had the specific quality of a place where history was about to happen and knew it. Kirk took his chair at 203 hours. Around him, the crew settled into their final configurations. Chekhov at navigation, his approach vectors calculated and recalculated to the point where they lived in his fingers rather than his head. At Sulu at the helm, with the easy readiness of a man for whom a starship's controls were an extension of his own nervous system. Uhura at communications, the false transmission built and loaded, and waiting with the patient lethality of a weapon that doesn't look like one. Spock at the science station, processing the sensor picture with the continuous, flowing attention of a Vulcan mind that could hold a dozen tactical variables simultaneously and weight them in real time. The view screen showed the current disposition of forces with the clinical clarity of a tactical display that does not editorialize. Red Dwarf occupied the center of the picture, enormous, ancient, lit by its own running lights in the amber darkness, looking precisely like what it was, very large, very old. A very improbable ship that had no business being here and was about to be sent home. The Enterprise sat between Red Dwarf and the Kartok, positioned with the deliberate intention of a vessel that wants its meaning to be clear. We are here. This is what we are protecting. Come through us. The Kartok had not moved. It sat at 7,000 kilometers, patient as geology, its sensor arrays still sweeping Red Dwarf with the focused avarice of a predator that has made its decision and is waiting for the right moment. The Thought Admiral vessel was still at extreme range, its drive frequency a barely detectable whisper against the background radiation of space, maintaining the tunnel, maintaining its anchor function, completely unaware that its communication protocol had been mapped, decoded, and was about to be used against it. "Sun on all stations report," Kirk said. "Navigation ready," Chekhov said. "Helm ready," Sulu said. "Communications ready," Uhura said, and there was something in her voice that Kirk recognized as the quality of a person who has prepared so thoroughly that readiness has become a kind of calm. "Science station ready," Spock said. "Tunnel aperture is stable. Holly's signal pathway is confirmed active through the deflector array. Transmission window is optimal." "Engineering," Kirk said, touching his communicator. Scotty's voice came back immediately, with the background sound of engineering in full operational mode. The hum of redirected power, the specific pitch of a deflector array carrying more than its standard load. "Ready, Captain. Deflector is holding at modified configuration. Power rerouting is stable. Holly is patched in at this end and confirms signal integrity." A pause. "Crichton says to tell you he'll have the power variance in the secondary coupling monitored throughout the transmission window and will compensate manually if required." "Tell Crichton thank you," Kirk said. A brief silence, and then Scotty's voice with a quality Kirk hadn't heard in it before. The quality of someone reporting something that has genuinely surprised them. "He says you're welcome, Captain, and he apologizes for any inconvenience the entire situation may have caused." Kirk allowed himself one moment of something that was almost a smile. "Red Dwarf," he said, opening the channel to the mining vessel. "This is Kirk. Are you ready?" Holly's face appeared in the small secondary screen at the arm of the command chair. Crichton had jury-rigged the connection from engineering an hour ago, producing a direct link between Red Dwarf's computer and the Enterprise's command station with the creative pragmatism that had come to define his contribution to this operation. Holly looked at Kirk with the expression of a 6,000 IQ intelligence that has been given something genuinely challenging to do and has been waiting, with the patience of geological time, for the moment to do it. "Ready," Holly said. "Lister," Kirk said. From Red Dwarf, Lister's voice came back with the quality Kirk had come to associate with him at his most essential. Stripped of the banter, stripped of the self-deprecation, the voice of the man underneath, who was, when everything else fell away, someone you wanted beside you when things got hard. "Ready," Lister said. Kirk looked at the view screen. He looked at the Kartok's position. He looked at the tunnel aperture coordinates that Spock had marked on the tactical display. A point in space that looked to every sensor except the most specialized, like nothing at all, and was in fact the mouth of a passage through the fabric of reality that led to a universe 3 million years removed from this one. "Uhura," Kirk said. "Send it." The false transmission left the Enterprise at the speed of light and arrived at the Thought Admiral vessel in just under 4 seconds. A burst of precisely structured Klingon cryptographic protocol that announced itself on their frequencies with the authority of a genuine communication from Commander Koloth aboard the Kartok, requesting priority authentication and urgent tactical coordination regarding a development in the primary operation. On the Thought Admiral vessel, a communications officer received the transmission, ran it against their authentication protocols, found it consistent with Koloth's known transmission signature, and initiated the response cycle. This was exactly what Uhura had predicted, and the response cycle was exactly what she had designed the transmission to provoke. A layered authentication exchange that would require multiple rounds of challenge and response before the Thought Admiral officer could be certain they were communicating with a genuine source. The clock started. "Authentication cycle initiated," Uhura reported, her voice carrying the careful steadiness of someone monitoring a process that is working exactly as intended and knows that the moment she relaxes, it will stop working. "First challenge received, responding with prepared counter-authentication." Her fingers moved across the console. "Response sent. Estimate 60 to 90 seconds for second challenge." "Scotty," Kirk said, "begin deflector transmission." "Aye, sir. Holly, you're live." In the secondary screen, Holly's expression didn't change, because Holly's expression essentially never changed. But something in the quality of the flat effect shifted in a way that Kirk was beginning to recognize as Holly's version of focus. The slight compression around the eyes, the marginal increase in the precision of attention, the look of a mind that has been underoccupied for a very long time and is now operating at something approaching its actual capacity. "Transmitting," Holly said. The Enterprise's main deflector dish, modified by the combined engineering genius of Montgomery Scott and Crichton over the previous 3 hours, began generating a quantum resonance frequency that had never been produced by any Federation technology before. A precisely calculated harmonic that matched the carrier wave of the tunnel aperture and, combined with the Thought Admiral vessel's generation signal, would create the constructive interference pattern that opened the aperture to transit with. On Spock's console, the tunnel aperture coordinates began to change. The quantum variance that had marked the tunnel's location shifted, expanded, deepened. The space at those coordinates doing something that space, in the ordinary run of things, did not do, which was to become a door. Aperture expanding, Spock reported. Current width, 40 meters. Expanding at projected rate. Full transit width for Red Dwarf, 612 meters, in approximately 10 minutes at current rate. Second authentication challenge received, Uhura said. Responding. A pause. Response sent. This challenge was more complex than the first. They're being thorough. A third challenge, estimate 90 seconds to 2 minutes. How are we doing on time? Kirk asked. We are 4 minutes and 17 seconds into the procedure, Spock said. The Thought Admiral vessel has not yet identified the deception. The Kartuk has not yet moved. Koloth knows something is happening, Kirk said. It wasn't a question. His sensor array has shifted orientation in the last 30 seconds, Spock confirmed. He is now conducting an active scan of the tunnel aperture coordinates. He has identified the aperture expansion. A pause of precisely the length that Spock used when the next piece of information was the significant one. He is hailing us, Captain. On screen, Kirk said. The view screen split. The tactical display on one half and on the other half, the face of Commander Koloth of the Klingon Empire's Imperial Fleet, who was, by any measure, exactly the kind of Klingon commander that Kirk had described him as. Patient, intelligent, controlled, with the specific quality of authority that comes not from shouting, but from never needing to. He looked at Kirk with the focused assessment of a chess player who has just watched his opponent make a move he didn't expect, and is recalibrating his understanding of the game. Captain Kirk, Koloth said, with the careful precision of a man who has decided that the opening of this conversation matters. I see that you are conducting an operation with the vessel Red Dwarf. Commander Koloth, Kirk said, with the equal precision of a man who has played this game before and knows that the first exchange sets the tone for everything that follows. I am conducting a navigational assistance operation for a vessel in distress, standard Starfleet protocol. The vessel is not in distress, Koloth said. It is functional and crude. Your operation involves a modification to your deflector array that is generating a quantum resonance frequency in the region of the navigational anomaly from which Red Dwarf emerged. A pause. You are sending them back. I am helping them go home, Kirk said. That vessel and its crew, Koloth said, with the flat certainty of a man stating a position he has already committed to, represent an asset of the Klingon Empire. They emerged from a tunnel generated by Imperial technology, by right of salvage under the Khitomer Conventions. The Khitomer Conventions, Kirk said. He'd, with the calm of a man who has spent considerable time with his ship's legal database over the years, apply to abandoned or derelict vessels. Red Dwarf is crude, functional, and operating under its own power. It is not salvage. It is a sovereign vessel whose crew have the right to determine their own course. Koloth's expression did not change in any large way, but something in it shifted. The specific shift of a man who has been given a legal argument he knew was coming and had prepared for, but is now assessing whether the preparation was adequate. The prime directive, he said, prevents Starfleet from interfering in the natural development of other cultures. Sending this vessel back through the tunnel is interference of precisely the kind your own regulations prohibit. Kirk felt something that was not quite irritation and not quite admiration. The specific feeling of being given a good argument by someone you're opposing, which was, in its way, a form of respect. The prime directive, Kirk said, applies to pre-warp civilizations and to cultures developing independently. Red Dwarf's crew are human beings from Earth. The Federation is the successor civilization to their home. They are not a foreign culture. They are our ancestors. He paused. I am not interfering in their development. I am giving them a ride home. Koloth looked at him for a long moment. You have thought about this carefully, Koloth said. I had a few minutes, Kirk said. An aperture at 240 meters, Spock said quietly. 6 minutes remaining to full transit width. Third authentication challenge sent, Uhura said, her voice carrying the careful tension of someone performing a deception while listening to the countdown of its discovery. This one is significantly more complex. I've built in 3 nested response requirements. Estimate 3 to 4 minutes for full cycle completion, which meant they had 3 to 4 minutes before the Thought Admiral vessel identified the deception and the operation changed character entirely. Koloth on the screen was doing the same calculation. Captain Kirk, he said, I am going to be direct with you because I respect your ability and because directness saves time that neither of us has in great supply. He leaned forward slightly. Just slightly. The minimum movement of a man making a point. The technology aboard that vessel, the artificial intelligence architecture, the holographic projection system, the mechanoid's engineering knowledge, represents a strategic advantage that the Empire will not allow to pass out of reach. I have orders, I intend to follow them. A pause. But I am also a practical man. I would prefer to resolve this without a confrontation that costs both of us ships and crew. So I am asking you, directly, commander to commander, to stand aside. Kirk looked at him. No, Kirk said. Just that. No elaboration, no legal argument, no diplomatic framing. Just the word, delivered with the absolute simplicity of a man who has made a decision and intends to keep it. Koloth looked at him for another long moment. Then he nodded. A small, precise nod that contained, improbably, a quality that Kirk recognized as genuine respect. Then we have nothing further to discuss, Koloth said. The channel closed. He's moving, Chekhov said immediately. Kartok is accelerating on intercept course. Current closure rate, they'll be in weapons range in 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Sulu, bring us between them and Red Dwarf. Full impulse. Kirk was already moving through the next steps. Spock, target their weapons systems. I want firing solutions ready, but I do not want to fire first. Not until I have to. Understood, Captain. Aperture at 380 meters, Spock added, without breaking the rhythm of his other calculations. 4 minutes, 20 seconds to full transit width. The timing was, Kirk noted, exactly as bad as it could reasonably be. Whole authentication cycle. They've identified the deception. Uhura's voice carried the quality of a controlled professional, delivering unwelcome information cleanly. The Thought Admiral vessel is breaking the authentication exchange. They're transmitting a priority alert to the Kartok. A beat. And they're adjusting their generation frequency. They're trying to close the tunnel. Holly, Kirk said immediately. On it, Holly said, with the flat certainty of someone who had anticipated this and prepared for it. Compensating. They change frequency, I change mine. We're still generating constructive interference. The aperture is still expanding, but they're making it harder. A pause. They're good. So are you, Kirk said. Yeah, Holly said. I know. The Kartok was closing at full impulse, like its weapons arrays charging with the distinctive energy signature that Chekhov's console was translating into a proximity alarm with escalating urgency. 6,000 kilometers. 5,000. The Enterprise held its position between the Klingon warship and Red Dwarf with the stubborn solidity of a vessel that has decided where it stands and means it. Kartok is locking weapons, Spock said. Red alert, Kirk said unnecessarily, since they were already at red alert. But there was a value in saying it. The value of a captain confirming to his ship that this is the moment. This is real. This is what we are here for. 4,000 kilometers, Chekhov said. Aperture at 490 meters, Spock said. 3 minutes to full transit width. 3 minutes. The Kartok at 4,000 kilometers in closing. Its weapons locked, its commander committed. The Thought Admiral vessel fighting Holly's signal with everything its modified array could produce, trying to close the door before Red Dwarf could reach it. The Enterprise between them, all with 60% shield efficiency and a crew that had been awake for 20 hours and was about to earn every one of them. Kirk gripped the armrests of the command chair with the controlled tension of a man who knows that the next 3 minutes will determine everything, and looked at the view screen and felt underneath the tactical calculus and the professional focus and the weight of command, something simple and clear. He was not going to let these people down. Sulu, he said, prepare to engage. On Red Dwarf, In the drive section that Crichton had maintained for 3 million years, with the devoted attention of someone who understood that this ship was not just machinery, but home, the ancient hydrogen ram scoop drives were spooling up for the transit with a sound that traveled through the entire 6-kilometer length of the vessel. A deep, resonant vibration that Lister felt through the soles of his feet as he stood at the drive control console and watched the tunnel aperture growing on the forward screen. Beside him, Rimmer stood with his hands clasped behind his back and his chin at the angle he used when he was trying to look like a commander, and on this particular occasion, actually managing it. The cat was at the secondary console, his extraordinary senses extended outward, tracking the tactical picture with an instinctive precision that required no instrumentation. Holly occupied every screen in the section simultaneously, processing the competing signals with the focused intensity of a mind finally completely, unambiguously engaged. 2 minutes, 30 seconds to full aperture, Holly said. Kirk's holding them off, so far. Lister looked at the tunnel, a point in space that was becoming something else, a shimmer, a deepening, a place where the universe had been convinced by the combined effort of a 6,000 IQ computer and a 300-year-old Scottish engineer and a mechanoid who apologized for his own competence, to open a door. Rimmer, Lister said. Yes, Rimmer said, without looking away from the screen. Kirk said, Starfleet, the Federation. It could be. I know what he said, Rimmer said. And? A pause. The drive vibration deepened beneath their feet. The aperture on the screen shimmered and expanded. And, Rimmer said carefully, I think that is a conversation for after we survive the next 3 minutes. Lister looked at him. Rimmer met his gaze with the specific expression he wore when he had made a decision and wasn't ready to share it yet, and knew that Lister knew he had made a decision, and was grateful for once that Lister was choosing not to push. Fair enough, Lister said. The cat looked up from his console with the sudden sharp attention of all his senses converging on a single point. The lumpy foreheads are firing, he said. The Enterprise shook. The first disruptor volley from the Kartok hit the Enterprise's shields at 21 hours and 43 seconds. Yes, and the bridge responded the way a living organism responds to impact. A full-body flinch that moved through every system simultaneously, the lights stuttering, the deck plates shifting underfoot, the shield emitters burning through their reduced capacity reserves with the urgent intensity of systems performing beyond their comfortable parameters. Kirk rode the impact in his chair with the practiced absorption of a man who has been hit before and knows that the first hit is information. Shields at 51%, Chekhov reported, his voice carrying the tight control of a navigator who has switched from approach vectors to damage assessment without breaking rhythm. Hull integrity holding across all sections, no breaches. They targeted our deflector array, Spock said, when with the focused calm of someone reporting a diagnosis rather than a catastrophe. The shot was precise. Koloth is attempting to disable our transmission capability without destroying the ship. He wants Red Dwarf intact and reachable. He cannot afford to damage the tunnel aperture, which means he won't go to full power, Sulu said from the helm, his hands already moving through the evasive pattern he'd had prepared since the briefing. It means he will use exactly the power necessary and no more, Spock corrected, which makes him more dangerous, not less. Precision is considerably harder to defend against than force. Return fire, Kirk said. Target their weapons arrays. Same philosophy. Disable. Don't destroy. The Enterprise's phaser banks spoke with the deep, resonant energy discharge that Kirk had always found. One in some part of himself he kept quiet about, genuinely impressive. Not the violence of it, but the precision, the way the ship translated intention into action with the fidelity of an instrument perfectly suited to its purpose. The phaser beams crossed the 4,000 kilometers between the two vessels in fractions of a second and struck the Kartok's forward weapons array with the accuracy that Spock's targeting solution had promised. The Klingon ship took the hit and kept coming. Minor damage to their forward array, Chekhov reported. Primary weapons still functional. They're charging for a second volley. Aperture at 560 meters, Spock said. 1 minute, 40 seconds to full transit width. 1 minute 40. The Kartok at 3,000 kilometers and still closing. So trading hits with the Enterprise in the careful, precisely calibrated exchange of two commanders who both understood that the real contest here was not the weapon's fire, but the clock. Koloth needed to disable the deflector before the tunnel opened fully. Kirk needed to keep it running for 100 seconds more. Everything else was commentary. "Holly," Kirk said, touching the secondary screen. "Still compensating," Holly said. The quality in Holly's voice had shifted. Still flat, still unhurried in delivery, but carrying underneath the flatness the specific tension of a mind operating at its absolute limit and managing it with the dignity of something that has decided not to be seen to struggle. The Thawed Admiral vessel has shifted to a counter-resonance approach. They're not trying to close the tunnel anymore. They're trying to destabilize the aperture geometry. If they introduce enough variance into the carrier wave, the aperture edges become unstable. Red Dwarf could transit, but the edges would be like a door with a closing mechanism, Kirk said. Like a door made of something that cuts, Holly said, with the precision of a being who means exactly what it says. "I'm keeping the geometry stable, but they're good at this, Captain. They built the tunnel. They know its weak points better than I do." A pause. "I need 2 more minutes of clean signal from your deflector. After that, the aperture will be self-sustaining, and they can't destabilize it." "I need 140, Kirk said. "You need 2. Split the difference." "That's not how physics works," Holly said. "I'm aware," Kirk said. "Do it anyway." The second Klingon volley hit the Enterprise's shields before Holly could respond, and this one was different from the first. Not a single focused beam, but a spread pattern. 3 simultaneous disruptor strikes across the shield envelope designed to saturate the reduced coverage and find the soft spots that 60% efficiency created. The bridge lurched hard enough that Uhura caught her console with both hands. Chekhov's coffee, he'd had coffee, Kirk noted, filing this for the future, went sideways off the navigation console, and the main lights dropped to emergency amber before the backup systems brought them back. "Shields at 38%, Chekhov said. And now the tight control in his voice had an edge to it that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it. The edge of a young officer doing the mathematics of hull stress and weapons power and coming up with numbers he didn't like. "Captain, another volley at that spread pattern and we lose the starboard shield grid entirely." "Sulu, roll the ship," Kirk said immediately. "Bring the port grid to bear. Give Koloth our strongest face." "Aye, sir." The Enterprise tilted in space with the fluid grace of a vessel whose helmsman had been flying it long enough to feel the ship's balance rather than calculate it, rotating on its axis to present the less damaged shield grid to the incoming fire. "Kartok is adjusting course to compensate," Spock said. Koloth anticipated the roll. He is moving to maintain his targeting angle on the deflector array." A fractional pause. "He is very good." "Yes," Kirk said. "He is." He looked at the tactical display. The geometry was clear and not comfortable. The Enterprise maneuvering to keep its best shields between the Kartok and the deflector, the Kartok maneuvering to negate that advantage, Red Dwarf sitting enormous and patient behind them, waiting for a door to open, the tunnel aperture expanding toward the width it needed to be, and the clock running with the specific indifference of physics to human urgency. 50 seconds, Spock said. 50 seconds to full aperture width. The Kartok at 2,500 kilometers. "Kirk to engineering," Kirk said. "Cyrus Scott here." Scotty's voice had the quality of a man managing several emergencies in parallel and doing it with the professional composure of someone who has decided that panic is an inefficiency he cannot afford. "Deflector is holding, Captain, but that second volley put a stress fracture in the power coupling on the secondary array. Crichton is compensating manually. He's been standing at that coupling for the last 10 minutes, running active corrections faster than the automated system can manage." A beat. "I want it on record that I have never seen anything like it, sir. His reaction time it's not natural. Well, it's not human, which I suppose is the point." "How long can he hold it?" "As long as he has to," Scotty said. Sure, and there was something in the simplicity of it that said he had asked Crichton the same question and received this exact answer. "Tell him to hold it 50 more seconds," Kirk said. 38 seconds, Spock said, correcting the timeline with the impartial precision of a scientist for whom the difference between 50 and 38 seconds was not a matter of opinion. 38 seconds, Kirk amended. Another volley. This one Kirk felt in his teeth, the shields screaming at the edge of their remaining capacity, the lights going fully to emergency amber and staying there. the structural integrity field compensating for stresses that the hull was not designed to absorb at this rate. Shields at 19%, Chekhov said, and the edge in his voice was no longer adjacent to fear. It was right beside it. Sulu, already moving, sir. Aperture. 20 seconds, Spock said. 20 seconds. The Kartok was charging for another volley. Kirk could see it in the energy readings climbing on Spock's console. The weapons array powering to the level that, at 19% shields, would not disable the deflector, but would go through it. Koloth had done the same mathematics Kirk had. He knew where the threshold was. He was going to hit it with his shot. Kirk looked at the view screen, looked at the tunnel aperture, a shimmer in space that had become, over the last 10 minutes, something visible, something real, a distortion in the starfield that was not quite a hole and not quite a door, but was something in between. Something that the universe didn't usually permit and was permitting now, because Holly and Scotty and Crichton had persuaded it to. 12 seconds. He made a decision. Uhura, open a channel to the Thought Admiral vessel. All frequencies, no encryption. Uhura turned briefly, a flicker of surprise crossing her professional composure. Sir? All frequencies, now. Channel open. This is Captain James T. Kirk of the USS Enterprise, addressing the commander of the Klingon vessel, maintaining position at bearing 274 Mark 15. He spoke with the absolute clarity of a man who has decided that honesty, delivered correctly, is sometimes the most powerful weapon available. You have been running a counter signal against our deflector transmission for the last 12 minutes. I want you to know that it hasn't worked. The aperture is opening. In approximately 10 seconds, it will reach full transit width, and Red Dwarf will go home. A beat. I am asking you, not as an adversary, as a fellow officer, to stand down your counter signal. Not because you cannot disrupt us, because disrupting the aperture geometry at this stage, with a vessel the size of Red Dwarf approaching transit, will not close the tunnel. It will destabilize the edges, and I think you understand what that means for the crew of that ship. He stopped. The bridge was absolutely silent except for the sounds of its systems. The hum of the impulse engines, the cycling of the shield emitters working with what they had, the soft, continuous processing of Spock's console. 8 seconds, Spock said quietly. The Thought Admiral vessel's counter signal continued. Unchanged, relentless. 7 seconds. Then, Holly's voice from the secondary screen, carrying something that was not quite surprise but was the closest thing to it that Holly ever expressed. They've changed frequency again, but it's not a counter-resonance. They've shifted to, they're stabilizing. They're stabilizing the aperture geometry. Kirk looked at the screen. They heard you, Uhura said very quietly, with the tone of someone who has spent her life believing in communication and is watching it work in real time. 6 seconds, Spock said. 5, 4. The Kartok's weapons array reached full charge. 3. Koloth fired. The disruptor beam struck the Enterprise's depleted shields with the full weight of a Klingon D-7's primary weapons array, and this time the ship didn't lurch. It rang, like a bell struck by something that meant it. Marked the structural integrity field absorbing an impact that the shields could barely mediate, the deck plates flexing, the hull groaning with the deep structural sound of a vessel at the edge of what it was built to withstand. On Spock's console, the deflector array power coupling screamed. In engineering, the stress fracture that Scotty had reported ran another 3 millimeters through the secondary array's power coupling, and the automated system, facing a variant spike it could not compensate for at its reaction speed, dropped the signal strength by 40% for 1.3 seconds. 1.3 seconds during which Holly was transmitting at 60% of required power, and the tunnel aperture, which had been at 102% of full transit width, shivered. 1.3 seconds during which Crichton, standing at the power coupling with his hands literally inside the conduit, running active corrections at a speed that no biological organism could have managed, felt the variant spike arrive and did something that Scotty would later describe, in his official engineering log, as the most extraordinary piece of real-time power management I have ever witnessed in 30 years of Starfleet service. He did not compensate for the spike. He used it. He channeled the excess energy from the fracture-induced variance directly into the secondary array's output, converting a power loss into a power surge that lasted for precisely the duration required to maintain signal integrity through the 1.3-second window, then bled it off through the tertiary coupling before it could damage anything else. He did it in the time it took the automated system to register the initial variance and begin formulating a response. The aperture held. "Full transit width achieved," Spock said. And for the first time in the entire engagement, his voice carried something beyond neutrality. Not drama, not relief, but the specific, quiet satisfaction of a scientist watching a prediction confirmed. "Aperture is stable and self-sustaining. Hawley's signal is no longer required for maintenance." "Red Dwarf," Kirk said immediately. "Go. Now." Lister had been watching the aperture on the forward screen for the last 2 minutes with the focused stillness of a man who has run out of things to do and has arrived at the part where the universe decides. Beside him, Rimmer stood with his hands still clasped behind his back, his chin still at its commanding angle. Or his expression doing the complicated internal work of someone who has made a decision and is sitting with its weight. The cat had his eyes half closed, all his senses outward, tracking the battle with the instinctive totality of a predator who experiences conflict as information rather than drama. Hawley's face was on every screen, managing every system simultaneously, and Hawley's voice, when it came, had the quality of a 3-million-year-old intelligence arriving at a moment it had been working toward for longer than most civilizations had existed. "Aperture is open," Hawley said. "Full transit width. Clean geometry. We can go." Lister looked at the aperture, the shimmer in space that was a door to somewhere else, to their universe, to the long, dark, empty road back to wherever home eventually turned out to be. He looked at Rimmer. Rimmer looked at the aperture. Then he looked at Lister. Something moved across his face that was too complicated to be named quickly. The compressed weight of a decision made in a briefing room conversation that he hadn't shared. Sitting alongside the fear that any reasonable person would feel. Sitting alongside the hard, bright anger that had been there since the beginning. Sitting alongside something else. Something quieter. Something that looked, if you knew Rimmer well enough to see it, and Lister did, like the first careful stirrings of something he had never quite been able to afford before. Hope. "I'm staying," Rimmer said. Lister stared at him. "I'm staying," Rimmer said again, with the slightly increased volume of a man who has said something he can't take back and is making sure it counts. "In this universe, with Starfleet." He paused. "I've thought about it. Kirk said there's a place for people who don't fit anywhere. And he stopped. Started again. "I have spent my entire existence being wrong about everything in the most right way possible, and nobody has ever given me the right conditions to be right about anything." He looked at Lister with the directness of a man who has decided to be honest, which for Rimmer required more courage than anything else in the catalog of human experience. "I want the right conditions, Lister, just once. I want to find out what I actually am when the conditions are right." Lister looked at him for a long moment. "You're an idiot," Lister said. "Probably," Rimmer said, "but you're our idiot." "I know," a beat. "I'm still staying." Lister nodded. Once, slowly. The way he nodded when something was true and sad and good all at the same time. He looked at the cat. "I was never going back," the cat said, without being asked, his eyes still half closed. "There's nothing there for me. I'm the best thing that ever happened to this species. I should be somewhere that appreciates that." He opened his eyes fully and looked at Lister with the absolute clarity of a being who has never in his life been confused about what he wanted. "You go. Take Hawley. Go find your Earth." Lister looked at Crichton. Crichton was crying. Not dramatically. Mechanoids didn't cry dramatically. Their tear ducts weren't designed for it. But his eyes were wet, and his face was doing the thing it did when his guilt chip and his care circuits and his social subroutines were all firing simultaneously, and he was overwhelmed by the experience of feeling too many things at once, which for Crichton was simply the experience of caring about people. "I'll stay with Mr. Rimmer," Crichton said through the wetness. "He needs someone to look after him. He won't eat properly otherwise, and he'll never iron his own uniform, and he has a very particular way of catastrophizing that requires active management." He paused. "And I have found something here that I didn't know I was missing. Mr. Scott, the engineering, the being useful in ways that are noticed." He looked at Lister with the expression of someone who has discovered, and late and unexpectedly, what home feels like. I think this is where I'm supposed to be. Lister looked at all of them. Rimmer standing at attention with his chin up and his eyes bright. The cat examining his reflection in the forward screen with the serene self-satisfaction of a being at complete peace with its choices. Crichton crying and apologizing for crying, and then crying slightly more. And he felt something enormous and simple move through him like a wave. Holly, he said. Yeah, Holly said. Just us then. Just us, Holly confirmed. Like always. Right, Lister said. He sat down in the pilot's chair. He put his hands on the controls. He looked at the aperture, the shimmer, the door, the improbable gift of a Federation captain who had decided that 4 lost souls from 3 million years in the past were worth protecting. He opened the comm channel to the Enterprise one last time. Kirk, he said. Kirk's voice came back immediately, carrying the sound of a bridge managing the aftermath of combat. Damage reports, system assessments, the organized, controlled energy of a ship that has taken hits and is taking stock. But underneath it, present and clear, the voice of the man. Lister, Kirk said. Thank you, Lister said. For all of it. A pause, not a long one. Live long and prosper, Kirk said. Wherever you end up. Lister smiled, engaged the drives, pointed Red Dwarf at the shimmer in space that was a door home, and flew through it. The tunnel closed 11 seconds after Red Dwarf transited. Not violently. There was no collapse, no shockwave, no dramatic implosion of quantum geometry. The aperture simply diminished. The shimmer in space contracting with the quiet purposefulness of something completing its function, shrinking from 600 meters to 400 to 200, to a point of light that burned briefly against the stars like a farewell, and then was gone. The space where it had been was indistinguishable from the space around it. Ordinary, silent, cold, bearing no evidence that anything remarkable had occurred there, except in the records of every sensor aboard the Enterprise and the memory of everyone who had witnessed it. Kirk watched it close from the command chair. He watched it the way he watched most things that mattered, fully without looking away, giving it the attention it deserved. 3 million years of distance collapsed into a transit that had taken Red Dwarf 47 seconds to complete. Dave, Lister, and Holly, honing alone again in their own universe, their own timeline, their own long road back to whatever Earth had become. Gone in less than a minute, leaving behind, in this universe, 3 of the most extraordinary individuals Kirk had encountered in a career that had not lacked for extraordinary individuals, and a silence that had the specific quality of an absence that was also, somehow, a presence. Kartok is standing down, Chekhov reported, with the slightly surprised tone of someone reporting something he had expected to take longer. They've ceased weapons lock, dropping to 1/4 impulse. A pause. They're moving off, Captain, heading back toward the neutral zone. Koloth, Spock said from the science station, is a practical man. With the tunnel closed and Red Dwarf gone, the strategic asset he was sent to acquire no longer exists in recoverable form. Continued engagement serves no purpose that would justify the report he would be required to file with Klingon Command. He paused. He will report an operational failure caused by Federation interference. The political consequences within the Empire will be his to manage. The Thought Admiral vessel? Kirk asked. Already gone, Uhura said. They jumped to warp approximately 8 seconds after the aperture closed. No final transmission. Kirk absorbed this. The tactical display, which had been a landscape of threat vectors and weapon signatures and countdown timers for the last 40 minutes, was emptying back toward its routine configuration. A star field, 2 departing contacts, the Enterprise sitting alone in the space where everything had happened, Ike systems cycling through damage assessment with the methodical patience of a ship taking stock of itself after something difficult. Damage report, Kirk said. Chekhov ran through it with the precise economy of a navigator reading coordinates. Shields at 17% and rebuilding. Starboard shield grid requiring realignment. 3 EPS conduits blown in the secondary hull from the final volley's power surge. 1 plasma injector offline in the port nacelle. Minor structural stress in frames 47 through 52, requiring inspection before the next warp transit. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that Scotty wouldn't have addressed in an organized fury of engineering activity before the next duty shift was complete. Casualties? Kirk asked. Lieutenant Park has a hairline fracture in her left wrist from the third impact, McCoy reported from the turbolift doors, appearing with the timing of a man who had been in sickbay, managing exactly this and had come to report the moment it was manageable. Ensign Reyes has a concussion. Mild, she'll be fine. 3 other crew with minor contusions. He moved to his customary position behind Kirk's chair. Considering what we just put the ship through, Jim, that's about as good as it gets. Yes, Kirk said. It is. He was quiet for a moment. The bridge around him returned to its normal rhythms. Spock processing post-engagement sensor data, Uhura clearing the communications logs, Sulu running helm diagnostics, Chekhov producing, from somewhere, a replacement coffee. And because Chekhov was apparently the kind of person who kept a backup. The ordinary life of a starship reasserting itself around the extraordinary thing that had just happened. Kirk thought about Lister, about the moment he had last seen him on the comm channel. Sitting in the pilot's chair of a 6-kilometer mining vessel, hands on the controls, pointing himself at a hole in the fabric of reality that led home, wearing the expression of a man who has been lost for a very long time and has just been given a direction. He thought about Holly's flat, patient, 3-million-year-old calm. He hoped they made it. He had no way of knowing whether they would. The tunnel was closed, the connection severed, their universe as unreachable from here as a memory. But he hoped. He stood up. Spock, you have the bridge. I'll be in the observation lounge. Captain. Spock looked up from his console. Before you go. A pause of the specific weight that meant what followed had been considered carefully. I have been reviewing the sensor data from the transit. Red Dwarf's emergence coordinates, combined with Holly's navigational records and the tunnel's carrier frequency profile, have given us a quantum topographical map of a previously uncharted dimensional space adjacent to our own. He paused again. The map suggests the dimensional space in question is extensive, potentially containing a large number of inhabited systems entirely unknown to the Federation. A beat. The scientific and exploratory implications are considerable. Kirk looked at him. File it, Kirk said. Full report to Starfleet Science Division. He paused. And flag it for the record that the navigational data was provided by a 6,000 IQ artificial intelligence aboard a 3-million-year-old mining vessel crewed by the last human being alive, and 3 of the most remarkable individuals I have encountered in 17 years of deep space exploration. Spock raised an eyebrow. Starfleet Science Division may require clarification on several of those descriptors. Let them ask for it, Kirk said. The observation lounge had the stars and the silence, as it always did, and Kirk sat with both of them for a while and let himself be where he was instead of where the next thing required him to be. This was a practice he had developed over years of command. The deliberate occupation of the present moment, poured before the debrief and the report and the next mission and the 1,000 operational demands that followed any engagement. 5 minutes of being exactly here, exactly now, in the space between what had happened and what came next. He thought about the Prime Directive. It was not, he admitted to himself the first time he had bent it. It would not be the last. The regulation existed for reasons he believed in deeply. The genuine ethical weight of non-interference, the danger of imposing one civilization's values on another's development. He had seen what happened when those protections failed. He respected the principle in the bone-deep way that only comes from having seen its violation. But the Prime Directive had been written by people, for situations that people could anticipate. It had not been written for Dave Lister, the last human being alive, 3 million years from home, asking for nothing more than a way back to something. And Kirk had always believed, with the pragmatic conviction of a man who had survived by trusting his own judgment, that regulations were the codification of principles, and that when the regulation and the principle diverged, the principle was the thing worth keeping. He did not think Starfleet would entirely agree with his reasoning. He was comfortable with that. The door opened behind him. He turned. Rimmer stood in the doorway with the slightly uncertain quality of a man who has made an irreversible decision and is now in the early stages of living with it. He had, Kirk noticed, straightened his uniform with the precise care that seemed to be his habitual response to situations requiring composure. The H on his forehead glowed softly in the observation lounge's subdued lighting, and he stood with his chin at its customary angle, which Kirk was beginning to understand was not arrogance but armor. The posture of a man who had decided a very long time ago that if he stood up straight enough, the world might eventually treat him accordingly. "Captain," Rimmer said. "Mr. Rimmer," Kirk said. "Come in." Rimmer came in. He stood for a moment looking at the stars through the viewport, the same stars Lister had looked at an hour ago, and something in his expression had the quality of a man saying goodbye to something and hello to something else simultaneously. "I wanted to—" He stopped, started again, arguing with the effort of someone for whom directness did not come easily and who was attempting it anyway. "I wanted to thank you for the offer and for what you said about Starfleet having room for people who don't fit anywhere." He paused. "I've been told most of my life that I don't fit. By my father, by the Academy examiners, by every superior officer I served under, by—" A pause. "By Lister, frankly, though he was usually more affectionate about it." Something moved across his face. "I want to be clear that I am not under any illusions about the difficulty of what I've chosen. I know I am—" He searched for the word. "Complex. Most people worth knowing are," Kirk said. Rimmer looked at him with the expression of a man receiving a compliment and checking it from several angles before deciding whether to accept it. He accepted it. Just barely. "I want to earn a commission," Rimmer said. "A real one, through the proper channels. I want to take the Academy exams, whatever version of them exists for someone in my particular circumstances, and I want to pass them on merit." He paused. "I was told once that I failed my astronavigation exam because I wrote the same word over and over in the answer booklet. That is not entirely accurate. It was 2 words alternating. The point is that I have never performed to my actual ability in an examination context, and I intend to rectify that." He stood slightly straighter. "I intend to rectify quite a lot of things." Kirk studied him, this holographic man from 3 million years in the past, who had spent his existence being his own worst enemy and had just decided in the space of a single crisis, to try being something else. There was something genuinely moving about it, which Kirk filed carefully alongside the awareness that Rimmer was also, without question, going to be extraordinarily difficult on a regular basis, and that the 2 things were not in contradiction. "I'll make the introductions to Starfleet Command," Kirk said. "Your situation is unprecedented, but Starfleet has mechanisms for unprecedented. It'll take time to work through the legal and procedural questions about holographic citizenship and officer candidacy." He paused. "But the Federation's principles are clear on this. Sentient life is sentient life. You have the rights and the opportunities that come with that." Rimmer absorbed this. "The cat," he said, he has very particular requirements. One in terms of accommodation and diet, and Bones has already put together a nutritional profile," Kirk said, "and we have a holodeck that can simulate any environment the cat finds agreeable." A beat. "He spent 40 minutes this afternoon explaining to Ensign Takahashi the principles of proper grooming." Takahashi appeared to take notes. Something happened at the corner of Rimmer's mouth that was improbably warm. "The cat has that effect," he said. "Creighton?" Kirk asked. "Already in engineering," Rimmer said, with the certainty of someone who has never doubted this particular outcome. "I think Scotty would physically prevent him from leaving at this point." He paused. "They're good for each other. Scotty needs someone who understands what he's actually saying when he talks about engines. And Creighton needs someone who sees the work instead of just the worker." He said it with the quiet observational precision that emerged from him sometimes briefly before the performance reasserted itself. The voice of someone who paid more attention to the people around him than he was usually given credit for. Kirk looked at him. "You're going to be all right, Mr. Rimmer," he said. It was not a prediction. It was something closer to a commitment. Rimmer stood with it for a moment. Let it land. Did not deflect it or undermine it or explain why it was statistically unlikely. He nodded. Once small, the nod of a man pocketing something valuable. "Sir," he said, and meant considerably more by it than the word contained. He left. Kirk turned back to the viewport. The stars were the same stars they had always been. The same stars Lister was navigating by, right now, somewhere on the other side of a closed door in the fabric of reality, pointing Red Dwarf toward the long road home. The same stars that Rimmer and the cat in Kryten would learn to read from Federation space, from a universe that had not existed for them this morning and was now the only one they had. He thought about what Spock had said in the turbolift, about the dimensional map, about the extensive space beyond the tunnel's origin, the potentially inhabited systems unknown to the Federation, the exploratory implications that were, by Spock's understated accounting, considerable. He thought about Red Dwarf navigating that space, about Holly's 6,000 IQ and Lister's practical, generous intelligence and the long empty road they were traveling together, just the two of them now, through the dark between stars. He hoped they found something worth finding. He was fairly certain they would. Kirk stood up, straightened his tunic with the habitual precision of a man who understood that presentation was a form of respect. For the ship, for the crew, for the work, and walked back toward the bridge. The Enterprise waited for him with the patient readiness of a vessel that had absorbed everything today, had required of it, and was, without fuss, prepared for whatever came next. Some ships, Kirk reflected, were like that. Some ships became something more than their components, through the accumulated experience of what they'd been asked to do and had done. The Enterprise was that kind of ship. It had been through things that should have broken it and hadn't, and the not breaking was written into it somewhere, in the metal and the systems and the people who kept choosing to be here. He thought Red Dwarf might be that kind of ship too. He stepped onto the bridge. "Mr. Spock," he said, "set course for Starbase 12, warp factor 4. "Course set, Captain." "Sulu, take us home." The Enterprise turned in the dark, its nacelles building toward the familiar, deep harmonic of warp transition, and then the stars stretched and the ship was gone, leaving behind only the ordinary silence of a sector of space that had, for a few hours, been the site of something that would be recorded in Starfleet's logs as a first contact incident of extraordinary complexity, and filed for the attention of the Federation Science Council. Only the Temporal Investigations Office, and 3 separate subcommittees that would spend years arguing about its implications. None of them would fully capture it. Some things resist the official record. The universe is not, in the final accounting, a place that rewards tidiness. It does not resolve its loose ends on schedule or deliver its meanings in organized sequence. It sprawls and contradicts and doubles back on itself, and the best that any sentient being can do, whether they arrived here by starship or by quantum anomaly, or by waking up from 3 million years of suspended animation to find everything they knew turned to dust, is to keep moving through it with as much grace as the circumstances allow. Dave Lister kept moving, somewhere on the other side of a closed door in the fabric of reality, one in a universe that the Federation would spend years theorizing about and never quite reach. Red Dwarf sailed on. 6 kilometers of rust and memory, and reconstituted chicken soup, and the particular kind of hope that survives everything because it has never been the optimistic kind, never the kind that requires good news to sustain itself, but the stubborn, unglamorous, thoroughly human kind that simply refuses to stop. Holly navigated, Lister flew. The stars ahead were different from the stars behind, and the road was long, and that was enough. It had always been enough. In another universe, 3 individuals were finding their footing. Kryten sent his first official engineering report to Starfleet Science Division. 47 pages, meticulously organized, apologizing in the introduction for its length, its content, its existence, and any inconvenience it might cause. Scotty submitted it with a personal commendation that described the author as the finest instinctive engineer he had encountered in 3 decades of service. The Science Division requested a follow-up. Kryten apologized for the delay and delivered it the following morning. The cat received his Starfleet orientation briefing, listened to approximately 4 minutes of it, declared the uniform unacceptable, negotiated a modified version that satisfied regulations while meeting his specific requirements, and was subsequently observed explaining advanced predatory threat assessment to a group of security cadets who were taking notes with expressions of genuine enlightenment. Arnold Rimmer sat the astro-navigation examination for the 2nd time in his existence. He did not write the same word repeatedly. He did not write 2 words alternating. He wrote answers. Careful, precise, occasionally brilliant answers. And when the results came back, he sat with them quietly for a long time before allowing himself to believe they were real. He passed. The Federation, built on the principle that diversity was not merely tolerable but essential, that every perspective, every origin, every improbable arrival from every corner of the cosmos added something irreplaceable to the whole, received 3 new citizens and asked no more of them than it asked of everyone. Show up, contribute, be present for each other in the long dark between stars. They did. Somewhere on a course that only Holly fully understood, Red Dwarf sailed on.